to see.
All right, here we go, kids. Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the table in the hall. If you have not picked up an agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. If you wish to be included in the mailing list for a decision, please add your name and contact information to the sign-up list located on the table in the hallway. If you wish to testify, please also fill out a yellow comment card. We will follow the basic format listed on the back of the agenda. It includes all the hearing procedure steps. We may vary from the process based on the specific circumstance of each hearing. Next on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes from May 25th, June 27th, August 22nd, September 12th, all of 2017. We can either take them one by one, or let's just do that. So does anyone have any corrections to make on the May 25th, 2017 minutes?
No.
No. Does anybody have any corrections to make on June 27th, 2017 minutes?
No.
Does anybody have any corrections to make on the August 22nd, 2017 minutes?
No.
No. Does anybody have corrections to make to the September 12th, 2017 minutes?
No.
No. I will now entertain an entertain a motion to approve the minutes from May 25th, June 27th, August 22nd, September 12th of 2017, all at one time.
I move we approve the minutes.
Seconded.
So moved by Commissioner Grau, seconded by Commissioner Jones. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none, they carry. Are there any informational items from staff?
I think I'll give you an update on some council actions and then talk about a few other things later. On last week, the council approved the Project Galaxy Bernard Garage project downtown and continued the meeting. They voted to approve it, but continued the meeting to adopt findings. So there was some new information that was presented at the meeting, and they wanted to have a stronger set of findings in support of it. So I thought that was an interesting bit of information for you. At that meeting, the council also approved the list of citizens that would be on the advisory committee for the comp plan update. So that process is going to start up pretty soon. Commissioner Travis was one of those appointed. So, okay. Can you, a couple other things that I'll update later.
Can you explain for us, land use nerds, did they present at the council hearing on that? Did they present new evidence?
No.
So the solar access was determined that it was something that was being talked about? Or did the letter present a new argument that wasn't presented before, I guess? I'm not quite sure why they had to carry on the findings.
There was on a hearing like that, where it's an appeal hearing, it goes to the council as a new hearing. They can hear a de novo hearing. They can hear new information, but it is on the record that was submitted to the Planning Commission because it's an appeal of the Planning Commission. So at that meeting, people can make new arguments related to information that is in the record already. I don't know that it was clear how much discussion there was about solar access. So I don't think it was a factor in the decision by the council one way or the other.
Okay. I was just I watched it.
Yeah.
And so.
But yeah, it's an interesting thing about the way we structure appeal hearings, because you can't come into that and suddenly have a new study that was done and drop it on the council. The council's making a decision on the same information that was presented to the Planning Commission, but new arguments can be made.
All right. Audience participation. This is an opportunity. This is an opportunity to comment on items not on tonight's agenda. If you wish to comment on an item that is on the agenda, there will be time for comments after the presentation. I do have a comment for somebody that is not on tonight's agenda, and Mr. Garnett.
Good evening. I'm Lee Garnett, and I am a member of the newly formed Milwaukie Tree Board, although I'm not representing the board here tonight. I'm speaking as the original appellant of the Mission Park project on King Road. There's some new members on the Planning Commission, but I assume I'm not talking about something no one knows anything about. It looks like they're about to start construction on it. They've got markers up, and there's a backhoe on the property. So we did have a tree board meeting last week, and had I had more information, I probably would have brought it up in the form of a resolution before the tree board, but I just didn't feel like I had enough information at the time to do that. So I have a couple of procedural questions first. The city council, took my appeal and put some directives onto the plan, and I just wonder procedurally what happens with that. It goes back to the Planning Commission and you looked at it, or what? How does that happen?
No, staff is responsible for implementing those conditions.
And it never has to come back before the commission again?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. I don't know what any kind of legal options might be there. Maybe there are none, but I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed in the final plan as I see it, mainly because there are 27 trees on this property with diameters of 36 inches or larger. These are really big trees. I don't think there's a place in the city, within the city limits, with an intact forest like this left. So of those 27 trees, even with the council's intervention, the new plan is only going to save 4 of those 27 trees, plus 7 other smaller trees for a total of 11 original trees. That means that more than 90 of them are going to be taken out of that property, including the largest tree on the property, which is a 54-inch pine. I believe it's a ponderosa pine, and probably might even be a heritage tree, would probably qualify for that. So I just hate to see, it just mowed down like this. And then the second issue I wanted to raise, which I understand is being addressed, and that is that the mitigation trees are really inadequate. They're too small a species. The butterfly Japanese maple and the red Baron crab just will not replace the canopy that's going to be taken out. One reason for that, I noticed on the plan, I guess from the developer, is they're using the Tigard Urban Forestry Manual Standards. Now, if they were to use the Portland Urban Forestry Manual Standards, they would have to have more than double the canopy. It's more than doubly restrictive as the Tigard. Now, we don't have a tree ordinance, so, I don't know if there's anything that can be done at this point. But even with the slight improvement from the original plan, which was just an out-and-out clear cut of all the trees, I still think that when these big evergreens are going to be hauled out, and I suppose King Road is going to have to be blocked off to do that, the public is not going to like it, and it may well become the poster child for a private property tree law, which the board is working on, and maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. Final comment would be, feel free to use the tree board, or I think the planning staff should use the tree board as a resource. We do have an arborist on the board, and we could certainly give you recommendations on the, proper mitigation trees. I'm not the arborist, and I wouldn't pretend to know, but we do have one, and that was the first thing he noticed when he looked at the plan, was the replacement trees would be inadequate. So, Phil, we're already the resource on hazard tree removal, but we review all the hazard tree removal orders now. So it seems like, we're new, so we're still finding our way around, but perhaps you could use us for a resource under situations like this. So I guess I would end with a question. Is there any way to modify the final plan?
I I don't believe there is to modify the plan in terms of removal of the trees. As I mentioned to you, the mitigation trees, we agreed with that point that those trees are not adequate, and we're trying to work with the developer to get, some trees that provide actual canopy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, final comment would be that, this could have been a lot better development. We would have saved a lot of the trees, some of the biggest trees in Milwaukee, had we had a tree law, tree ordinance, and we're working on it. So hopefully this situation won't present itself again, but I just hate to see one of our last intact in-city forest being taken down like the way it's going to be. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any questions? Mr. Garnett?
Yes.
I would just like to thank you for your service on the tree board. And I know that a couple of members on there that they have high expertise in this area. And I thank you for coming up with the tree ordinance, because we here at the commission struggle with this of preserving our environment, and without having the rules and regulations, there's nothing that we can do to protect them. I also thank you for relooking at that plan and bringing it to the attention of the planning staff to get some of that canopy back. And also, I want to urge your tree board to look at a heritage tree idea, so that maybe we can preserve some of these trees that have a history in our city, and make them stand out and be celebrated as well. So thank you for your service, sir.
To do. Thanks. Anything else? Hey.
Okay, I flipped my page. All right, the next agenda item is public hearing on S-2017-003 with VR 2017-010. The public hearing on the Silas Heights subdivision is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider application number S-2017-003 with VR 2017-010. Purpose of this application is to request a subdivision with a variance at 11159 Southeast Maplehurst Road. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee's zoning/subdivision ordinance, comprehensive plan, and any applicable municipal code provision. The applicant has the burden of proving that the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I now ask staff to cite the zoning ordinance sections where the criteria can be found.
From the Milwaukee Municipal Code, the applicable sections are Section 19.1006, Type 3 Review, Title 17, Land Division, Section 19.301, Low-Density Residential Zones, including the R7 zone, Chapter 19.700, Public Facility Improvements, Section 19.911, Variances, and Chapter 19.1200, Solar Access Protection.
Thank you. All testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criterion or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow response precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party withstanding may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons withstanding are those who submit written comments or testify in person or sign the Planning Commission attendance sign-up sheet in the hallway. Conduct a hearing. I will recognize those persons who have completed the testimony cards and have given them to me. These are these yellow cards. When you come to the podium, please state your name and address for the record so they may be entered into the minutes. If you are here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria and to avoid repetition and irrelevant information. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the Commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless a continuance or extension is required requested or agreed to by the applicant. Conflicts of interest, site visits. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from this hearing?
No.
Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest? No. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report on any ex parte contacts?
No.
I would. At our Linwood NDA, which this is in their neighborhood, our land use chair brought this forth. There were questions about the plan. I did not participate in any of the opinions, but there were technical questions like what are the exact rules for the variance of the depth of that I answered in a technical way. Does anyone have any rebuttal to the ex parte contacts declared by commissioners? Will any commissioner who has visited the site prior to this hearing please raise their hand? Did any of those commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or note anything different from what is indicated in the staff report for this application? No. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Planning Commission? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? All right, let's proceed to the staff report, please.
All right, good evening, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. I'm Brett Kelver, an associate planner with the city's planning department, and I'll be trying to walk us through this application tonight. This is for an 11-lot subdivision at 11159 Southeast Maplehurst Road. I believe the proposed subdivision name is Silas Heights. That's how I'm saying it. I guess the applicant can correct me if I'm wrong. And I believe my expectation is most everyone in the room knows where the site is, but just so that we have some photos for reference if they're needed, and just to make sure we're all on the same page, I have a few images to show just to kind of dial us into the location here. So the subject property, this is a fairly zoomed out view, but it's this large property with the yellow hatching. It is right kind of on the edge of the city boundary. So most of this dotted line here is showing the city boundary, and the properties to the west of it, for the most part, are inside the city limits, and the properties, primarily on the east side of the line are outside. So this is one of those interesting sites that's right on the edge. We've got, county properties that are adjacent on one side and city properties on another. And to just zoom in a little bit, I can show you some of the main streets. This is Maplehurst Road is coming and curving around and presents the frontage here. It makes a connection to Monroe Street. We have Linwood Avenue farther to the west. Montgomery Drive connects. We have 64th and 66th Avenue dead ends into the north side of the property. So if any of these images are helpful for any questions you might have, or anyone from the audience, we can. Could you just,
is this property inside? Is all the property inside the city limits?
Yes.
Okay, and it would remain so?
Yes,
okay.
Yeah, we're not talking about changing the city limits at all. And I just guess to be clear, this one, so again, the subject property is the one that has the yellow hatching on it. Here is the city boundary coming around. There's one adjacent property, there's a residence here that is also inside the city limits, but the properties to the south, the properties in this area to the north, and here to the east are all outside of the city. And just for reference, the bright yellow is showing the city zoning. In this case, it's all residential, kind of on our low density zone, R7. So the site itself and the rest of the residential properties in this area are all zoned R7. And then for reference, here is our subject property. This is the county zoning. So it's showing some of the surrounding area, and the county is zoned residential R10, a little bit lower density. And then some of the larger sites, this is kind of that large farm field area, is zoned R7 in the county. So again, for reference, if this is helpful. But the main idea is most of the surrounding area is zoned for low density residential use. For what it's worth, here's a look at the site itself, again, kind of with the yellow outline. So there's one existing house on it and a large outbuilding. The site takes its primary access from Maplehurst Road. There's a wide driveway that leads into the property right now, and the proposed development would remove, most all the improvements on the site. So the existing house would be demolished, as well as the outbuildings, in order to make for the subdivision. And here is the proposed layout. So there would be an extension of 66th Avenue, which currently, as I mentioned, dead ends into the north part of the property. That street would be extended into the site with a cul-de-sac towards the west and a new street connection out to Maplehurst Road to the east. This street would essentially take the place of the large, what is essentially a wide driveway now, and that accounts a little bit for some of the curving of the proposed alignment of the street and also some of the lots. Obviously, if the site included this additional residential property, it might make more sense and be a little more rectilinear to just come straight out to Maplehurst. That would get us a little bit farther away from Catalina Drive, just to the north. But the property is what it is, and this is how they're able to provide access to Maplehurst Road. So all of the proposed lots are at least 7,000 square feet in size. That is the minimum lot requirement for the R7 zone. And let's see, I guess just some other things to note, as we will be getting a connection, some street connectivity from 66th into the property, and then out to the east to Maplehurst Road. There will be sidewalks provided through the development. In this case, because the road itself, which will include travel lanes and also space for on-street parking, but because of the relative narrow width of the property, the sidewalks that will be there won't be in the public right-of-way. They'll actually be on both sides of the street on the lots that are adjacent. They'll be in a public access easement. So that's part of the proposal, is to establish an easement. Our usual preference is to get them in the public right-of-way, but if in that case, that would really change the lot configuration here and take us under the minimum density requirement. There will be new connections to the city's existing services. We have water, sewer, and storm facilities in the area, and those utilities will be extended primarily in the street itself. There are 2 easements that run on the adjacent properties that are just here to the west. There's a 5-foot wide easement for a sewer connection, and that will be utilized to make a connection to the city sewer through that adjacent property. And then there's another easement that is already in place for stormwater. And so in particular for overflow purposes, the city's storm system will be connected to. We have facilities out in 64th Avenue, and so those utilities will be connected. In addition, they'll all be served by city water. And even though there are no lots being proposed, farther east than right where my cursor is here, there will be a requirement to extend the water line to the edge of the property for future connection to the water utility for future development. The key issues that staff identified for this revolve primarily around the central variance that was requested. The applicant is proposing to reduce the rear yard setbacks for all the lots from the required 20 feet down to 15 feet. Some of that, the applicant can explain more to you about the logic and thinking there. Part of what's happening, though, is there's a requirement for a 20-foot front yard setback as well. And if you'll remember that we're getting, I think it's a 6-foot public easement along the fronts of all these properties in order to put the sidewalks in. The applicant has chosen to, rather than have the houses be 20 feet from the property line, which would put them only about 14 or 15 feet from the sidewalk, they're continuing to have them at 20 feet back of the sidewalk, and their request is to have a little bit less of a rear yard. I think that's my understanding of that, the reasoning for that. So normally, if any individual property owner was wanting to reduce their rear yard setback, if they were doing an addition or someone had a vacant lot and wanted to build a house and they wanted to reduce their rear yard from 20 feet to 15 feet, that would go through a type 2 variance, which is one that is considered an administrative variance. We do provide public notice of those kinds of variances, but it's a decision that the planning director makes. There would certainly be opportunities, as there are tonight, for people to raise concerns or questions, and the director would consider those. In this case, our recommendation or suggestion is that the variance seems approvable. We've recommended a condition in order to mitigate what could potentially be, houses that are 15 feet from the rear property line on all these lots, some landscaping, that is trees or some kind of vegetation that would reach a height of at least 25 feet all along those rear boundaries to provide some screening. So that's our staff's proposed mitigation for that. And then some of the other variances that arose as we look through the application have to do with the lot depth for a couple of the lots, and in particular because of the curves of the street. There are a couple of the lots that technically don't quite meet 80 feet in depth, in particular like where they're cut into a little bit by the cul-de-sac. One side is 80 feet wide, deep, and the other side is just a little bit less, so the average depth ends up being a little bit less. That's affecting, I think, these two lots and this lot as well. And our opinion was that those were really negligible impacts, that in effect, these lots are effectively 80 feet deep, even though there's just a touch missing for a couple of them. Because we have a cul-de-sac configuration and because of the shape of this property, at some point you have to draw some kind of an angled line to create lots, and that for this lot and this lot here results in what we call a compound line segment. So instead of just going straight to a corner, what we're considering to be the side property line here goes and has a jog. The distance that jog is allowed to take kind of under the regular circumstances is a little bit more than what's allowed. And so our conclusion was that this again was an allowable variance given the shape of the property that's being worked with and the configuration of the cul-de-sac. And there was a final variance needed because of the spacing. Let me see if I can back out just a little bit. Sorry. The spacing between what will be the new street as it comes out onto Maplehurst Road and the existing street here, Catalina Lane, is a little bit less. I think it's between 50 and 60 feet, and the city code wants to see at least 100 feet usually between streets. In this case, given the property configuration, there's really not an alternative to have the street come out, and we do think it's more important to have a street connection. Also because Catalina Lane is a fairly low volume street. I mean, it serves 14 houses. There's not much expectation of conflict in terms of traffic here. So that's the quick background, I guess, on all those variances. So outlining for you the standard decision-making options for you, we've prepared some recommended findings and conditions of approval that were in your packet. One option is to approve those, depending on the presentation of public testimony tonight and your own discussion. If you decide there's some changes or adjustments that are needed to those, that's certainly an option. We'll just try to capture whatever changes need to be made. There's also an option to continue the hearing. We're not in any danger of getting close to the end of the 120-day clock, so if you feel that the issue needs to be some further discussion or further information, that's an option for you. Or you could deny the application altogether. If you do that, we'll need to make some, at least note what changes need to be made to the findings. Our recommendation, just in summary, is to approve the proposed subdivision and to approve the variances that are a part of it and adopt the conditions and findings that were in your packet. So with that, I'll ask if there are any questions.
I have a question about the compound line segment. If you could go back to that slide. And so 10% cumulative lateral shift. Can you just show me what that is?
Yeah, so for these, in the numbering, here's lot number 1. So this is lot 6 and lot 8 have this issue. We're considering this on the curve is the front property line. This line back here is the rear. This is one of the side lines. And essentially this segment plus this segment are the other side line. And so what the code says is when you have this kind of shift, if you draw a line between the point right here at the front and this back corner and then measure the distance between I guess, the farthest out that the compound segment gets and what would otherwise be a straight line back there, it's not, this distance is not supposed to be more than 10% of the
10%.
overall distance from here to here. For example, if this is 120 feet from this point to this point, I can have no more than 12 feet of distance here. That's understood to be the shift.
Thank you. Okay.
And if they were to do that, those lots fall under the 7,000 minimum lot size, and the shape of those lots just is more reasonable with that. And the center of the pie there ends up just getting bigger for no real reason. It just seemed like a more reasonable shape for those lots.
Right. If you draw a straight line from this point back to the corner and make that the boundary, lot 8 and lot 6 each go under the 7,000 square foot minimum. So it kind of seems like it's one or the other consideration. And if you remove them all together or try to say, well, let's just split it down the middle and have one big lot here and one big lot here, you still have compound line issues because of the cul-de-sac shape, and you're losing at least one, if not two lots, and that starts to get us back into a question of, are we hitting the minimum density that the R7 zone is looking for?
Brett, can you explain a little bit why there are 2 points of vehicular access to both 66th and Maplehurst here?
Sure, rather than just a cul-de-sac on one end or the other. Yeah. Let me back up just a little bit to the vicinity. I mean, in general, what the city's public facility code for streets wants is we want connectivity. We want to minimize, in general, the number of dead-end streets. And so where there are opportunities to make connections, we want to take advantage of those. And here, obviously, we have a street that's ending. We have another point of contact to a different street. And we're working with a single property where the proposal is already to basically clear everything off. So we have a little bit of a blank slate. And so that provides an easy opportunity to, with some kind of configuration, to make a connection between Maplehurst and 66th. Another idea that doesn't work very well here would be, well, what if I just make the street come through from Maplehurst and punch out somehow to 64th. Well, in this case, we have existing houses, and that presents that this developer is not in control of, and there's really no realistic chance in the future that the city would buy these properties and try to extend the street. So that's not a real workable option. And so we feel that what's being presented here and what the city code is requiring is some kind of street connection here, and we end up with that little cul-de-sac to access the properties at the western end of it. Does that get at what you're...
It didn't go over real well out there in the audience.
No, well, I mean, and I say that precisely for that reason. I mean, if all this area was blank, you might try to think about how can we get a little bit more of a grid, but that's not the situation that we're dealing with. We're dealing with already developed sites adjacent. So.
Okay. And just to confirm, this site did not need a traffic impact study?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I have one. Could you flip to the slide that's got the little closer up satellite view? There we go. So I'm looking at the plan and the tree removal, and I definitely can see, the 20-inch and the 28-inch deciduous, which I'm assuming are the ones that are. So I'm directionally challenged for everybody out there, towards the right there, bottom right, there you go. Those on there, but do those other trees in the background or along that lower property line, do those all get removed?
I believe that's what's proposed, but I think that's a question that's better addressed to the applicant. They can speak with a little more specificity, I think, about what trees are proposed to be removed and which, if any, will remain.
Okay. Any other questions for staff?
None for me. Mm-hmm.
All righty. Thank you, Brett. Have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items included in the meeting packet?
We have, late yesterday afternoon, we received 2 comments via email, and I distributed copies of them at your places, and I have additional copies up here that I can pass out to folks in the crowd. They were from Mark Moffett, who's a neighbor at 10968 Southeast 66th Avenue, and also we got a comment from David Adams, who is an owner at 6355 Southeast Montgomery Drive. Other than that, no other comments received.
Okay. Applicant testimony. Are there comments from the applicant or their representative? And just a reminder, please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Hayes McCoy. I'm the engineer for the proposed subdivision. My address is 1180 Southwest Lake Road in Redmond, Oregon. It's a beautiful day over here, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Brett, can I ask you to switch to the slide, or perhaps just tell me which...
Where do you want to be?
I want to go to the subdivision, actually.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, Brett, could you slide his microphone up a little bit closer just to make sure that we got him? Thank you.
You can tell me what to do. Well, good evening. And so the proposed subdivision before you is a culmination of a number of months' work because it is infill. It's surrounded by existing residential development, and inherently that has some challenges with it. Brett touched on probably the most challenging part, which is the depth or the width of the property north-south direction, which was one of the challenges. And we've gone through actually a series of iterations, and this is where we've come to. Also, who is not here is the engineering department, which we had to work with. When we started, we went through your code and we said, okay, lot depth, we want to increase that as much as possible. What is the maximum or the minimum type street? And through a series of iterations, we've ended up with the current configuration we have. I guess a quick rundown. So the width of the street allows traffic to get through, it allows parking, and we have pedestrian access on each side. And that was determined as the best function for the site, which at some point it compromises what depth we have on the lots. And so it pushes the buildable footprint back. Now, it does create a situation where we can have a garage here and somebody can park in front of their garage. If we start pushing these back closer, we ended up with parking in front of sidewalks, and I don't think you want that. Most people do not. The site has some topography. It actually, you have to climb a little bit up here and it drops off here. So these homes will sit a little bit below the road. And there was also a question about trees. So the proposed tree removal, the trees you see here are the ones we want to save. The ones around the perimeter, there's really no reason to remove them. We don't anticipate grading all the way to the property line. The ones that do need to remove are generally, they need to be removed because the street would go right through them. We need to bring in sewer and water, of course, or they're in a position where a future home, and I don't have a specific example with this slide, but if there was a tree, say, right in the middle of a buildable footprint, it's fairly reasonable to remove it. We held a meeting, I believe it was May, about May. We had a pre-application conference with the city and discussed a lot of issues. And through the iterations of the subdivision, we came to a point where we requested the 15-foot rear setback variance. Sorry, this cursor keeps going away. And the primary reason, as stated before, is we need enough separation from the front of the street to get a home, allow people to have a front yard. I don't think we want our homes right on top of the street. And so there is a section of code that allows that 25% variance that would go to the rear setback. Through discussion with the city, they proposed some improved landscape screening trees primarily to help protect the neighbors. The neighbors, obviously, their life would change with a development like this, and that's absolutely acceptable to us and very reasonable to ask from the city. Other than that, I think Brett covered most of the other key points. Any questions?
Any questions from the applicant? No. All right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so last call for yellow cards. I have 4 of them in my hand, so if you'd like to speak, yeah, hand them on over to Brett. You can keep going until we run out of yellow cards, so that's kind of the deal here. All right, and so I have to put this in a particular order, and I'm not quite sure what to do with this one. I have one that says to ask a question. Do they go first or last?
Typically, I would have them after the any testimony in favor, and then they could testify with either at the kind of the opponent section.
Okay. Seeing that I don't have any in support, support gets to go first. That's why. I will start with the opposition and then go to the question last. Sounds good? Okay. So I will call you on up, and please state your name and address for the record. And the first one up is Angela Tanner, please.
Hi, my name is Angela Tanner, and our address is 11144 Southeast 66th Avenue.
And Ms. Tanner, please speak into the microphone or bring the microphone closer to you. Thank you. We need to be able to get it on TV.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Is there a chance that I could actually get my card to read my questions? I was writing them kind of quickly. Thank you. And should I repeat my address, or?
Nope.
Is that, okay. So, as I said, we're off of 66th. We're actually 2 houses in from the dead end. And so what do you call it? The connection to 66 would, I feel like it would impact us directly. And my question about that is, why didn't the project need a traffic impact statement, considering these are 11 lots going in? It's not a very walkable area, so I think it's fair to assume that there will be more vehicles coming in, possibly 11 or more. And I was wondering why that wasn't something considered or necessary.
So it's really goofy because it's all procedural, but the city will have a chance to rebut at the end of the public, and I will be hopeful that they will answer that question for you.
Okay. My second question is just for some clarification. So I'm wondering, how close will the backyards of these lots be to existing homes? Is it going to be 15 feet? Am I understanding that correctly?
The answer is that the house, and please staff correct me if I'm not answering this correctly, but the distance from the house to the back of the property line will be 15 feet. The distance from the other house to the adjoining property line, I don't know the answer to that, but typically it's 20 feet. Okay. So you'd have 35 feet technically of distance between the 2 houses.
Between the 2 houses. And so taking that into consideration, was there any concern about what this development is going to do to existing property values and the ability for resale for these homes that are going to have houses that close to their property line, and what that will look like for these people?
We'll have the applicant maybe rebut to that question as well.
Okay, that is the extent of my questions.
Okay, and I'm going to come back and grab your, I need it for the record.
Sure.
Any questions for Ms. Taylor? Thank you. Next up is Allison Kapak?
My name is Allison Kopic. It rhymes with topic, even though it doesn't look like it. I live at 6665 Southeast Charles Street, which is a neighboring property just to the south of the proposed development. I'm speaking tonight mainly with a concern about traffic and safety. Maplehurst Road, to the north of this proposed area, there's a hill, and cars come zooming over that hill, and then further to the south of this development, Maplehurst turns, and cars come zooming around that corner. So my main concern is safety. This is, again, Maplehurst. I'm speaking directly to that because that's the main street that I'm off of. There's no sidewalks there, and we do have pedestrians and bikers that are braving it and using that road, but it's a very dangerous area. When I cross Maplehurst, even to go to a neighbor, it feels treacherous. So I'm concerned about the additional volume of traffic on this road, and then adding an additional road so close to Catalina and so close to the corner of Maplehurst seems like a definite concern to me, especially since this is an area with a lack of sidewalks. There's the curve and the hill and cars speeding through. So I guess I will echo that in my opinion, a traffic study would be helpful for this project as well. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Kopic? I have one. Would a stop sign somewhere on Maplehurst or wherever the speeding is, would that be helpful somewhere with the additional traffic?
I think a stop sign maybe is like one possibility. I'm thinking there might be like multiple traffic. I feel like it's an area that has current problems, and I feel like I know in talking with neighbors that a stop sign could be helpful, but also just any other traffic monitoring devices or the lights that show what your speed limit is, anything. I feel like it's an area already in need of something. So, yeah.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Cami Estes.
Well, I don't think I can say anything better than that. Cami Estes, 6655 Southeast Charles Street, Milwaukie. And again, it's the concern of traffic, adding 11 additional houses. There's that, if you've been there, coming around Maplehurst is almost now a blind corner, especially coming out of Charles Street. The house directly across has put wooden slats in their chain link fence, so you can barely see oncoming traffic. And again, they speed. There's no sidewalks. It's a dangerous place. And sometimes taking your car out or even walking you feel hazardous. So I'm just reiterating what Ms. Kopic said. Why wasn't there a traffic study? It's just, in my opinion, going to make it more dangerous. And I didn't write it down. They're going to be in my backyard. So there we go.
Are there any questions for Ms. Estes? No? Thank you.
Thank you.
Brett, could you do me a favor? Could you put up the slide that has a close-up so we can see where Maplehurst is, since we've had a couple of those questions? Okay, thank you.
So could one of us show you that curve?
We got it, or we see it.
Have you been there?
Yeah, I have been there before, yes. Next up is Linda Claben, please.
Hello, my name is Linda Claben. I live at 6635 Southeast Charles Street. Could you bring up, Brett, the other map so I can show them where I live?
Zoomed out a little more, or?
No, the one that has all the house lots on it, like this. That one. Okay. I'm going to show you where I live.
Oh, here. Let me.
I live here. My concerns with this development is that my lot and several others next to me, our lots are 8 to 10 feet lower in elevation. The proposed lots up there are higher up. I'm concerned about water runoff. I'm concerned about privacy, and also concerned that the backyard is smaller. I also wanted to bring up the question about the value of our homes are going to go down. And also the traffic is definitely a problem. I wanted to ask the applicant, they said something about putting landscaping in of 25 feet along the boundary. I believe that's the boundary that they were talking about, and I would like that clarified more. It would be nice if they could build some kind of a wall or extra drainage or something so that that water runoff, as you know, we've had a lot of downpours recently and all last year, and I'm afraid that's going to come right into our backyards because we're so much lower. So, and the privacy issue being lower, and if they build a 2-story house, that is going to be a problem for me and my other neighbors. So I'd like clarification about landscaping along that boundary, and if anything else could be done with that.
Okay. Any questions for Ms. Cleveland?
So now when there's flooding, there's no issues?
No.
Okay, because you're saying because there would be houses and...
Yes, it's between the streets and the houses, right. It's going to cover surface. Over 50% of the surface. Mm-hmm. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then Mary Corrigan, who wants to ask a question.
I think both of our names were on there. So.
Okay, John and Mary Corrigan, yes. It's perfectly fine.
We live at 11134 Southeast 64th. We're on the west end of the development. We're the lucky ones that have the electrical easement and the sewer easement on our property. So we have concerns about that. Concerns about having, if you're putting your variance to 15 feet, how are you going to put a wall of trees or whatever, because your house is right next to it at that point. So I'm concerned with that. Also, I know that there's been talk about changing Monroe traffic, making it more bike and pedestrian friendly. So I have concerns that that means people would head out on 66th, then come down to 64th and come onto Montgomery Street, onto 64th and then onto Montgomery to Linwood, because they want to put a barrier across Linwood.
At Monroe.
At Monroe, because they've had so many accidents there. So that creates a bigger problem with 11 more houses coming out onto Linwood and Monroe.
That's right.
Now you're creating a more of a traffic issue than we already have. And there's been no check on traffic, but if you make changes to the traffic flow there, you're going to put it into the neighborhoods even worse.
Yeah, we think that barrier is a terrible idea because it'll send it right down into our quiet neighborhood. Linwood is a busy street. Everybody's used to traveling on that. But with that barrier, it's going to bring it right down into, there's kids in our neighborhood. They play out there. It's a bad idea.
Also, when she was talking about the flooding, ours is at the lowest end of the hill. So when you put all that concrete in those houses that all that's draining off of, it's going to go somewhere. So it's going to come down to the hill. And we've lived there 30 years, and the first 5 or 10 years, the pasture on the southwest end of that used to flood. It would go up into the property 30, 40 feet, maybe even farther. So I don't know. They haven't done anything to change it. We've just been lucky enough that we haven't had floods like that or enough rain like that it's created issues lately.
But there was flooding from halfway in lot number 7 on the proposed plot. It would be 3/4 of the way across and all the way to the edge of in that corner, the bottom right corner. And it would go 30 feet out. The water would stand up there. We're just slightly higher, but it's a problem. It could be a problem. So I also would like to voice a concern about to get something set in stone about the planting barriers, because like the woman said before, they'll just, if there's a 2-story house, it's going to look right down into our backyard. Our bedroom is back there, and it'll be so high, and since we're below them, we'll have no privacy. None. And I'd like to have something securely stated about what kind of plantings are going to be back there, how they're going to address that issue, because not be good for us. I think that's all.
I'm assuming that if the planting is on the new development side of the property lines, then if it's a 15-foot, then you're basically going to have to go straight up, because there's not going to be room for trees to go in that will get any large diameters to be able to keep it from touching the houses then.
Any other questions any questions for the Corrigans? I have one. You brought up a concern about the easement, which goes between you and your neighbor's yard, or however that works.
It's one on either side of the property.
And do you have a specific concern about the easement?
Well, it's going to, basically, who pays for taking the fence down and putting the fence back up and anything else that's on our property?
Okay. All right. Anything else for the Corrigans? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Does any member of the Planning Commission have any questions regarding the testimony to this point?
No.
No?
No.
Questions for whom?
We'll have staff come back up and probably the applicant as well.
All right.
Does the applicant have any rebuttal or any additional comments in response to the public testimony?
State my name again.
Please.
Hayes McCoy, applicant, civil engineer. So you're on the traffic impact analysis generally, and I think Brett's probably going to be able to answer that better than me, but city code usually says that there is a threshold where a traffic impact analysis is warranted for a development. I don't know what that threshold is by city code, but I know that we weren't there. We're a net 10 homes in a fairly developed area, so we're not going to double the traffic in the area. But some of the other things, stormwater, we're required to mitigate stormwater runoff. So all of the runoff from the streets, we have to take care of. And we'll have a drainage basin here to handle runoff on this side. Over here, we will have presently we're proposing to have a dry well, which is a manhole that can take and infiltrate stormwater runoff. And then ultimately we like to connect through the storm drainage easement as an overflow. So the city's pretty stringent that we have to maintain everything on site. And additionally, for the new homes, the city of Milwaukie usually uses a shallow dry well. So it's also an infiltration device underground. The roof drains are supposed to be directed by pipe to there. That takes place during home construction, but we're supposed to infiltrate water on site. When we were there working, we tested the infiltration of the soils in the area, and they aren't the best, but they aren't bad either. They're reasonable. And so that's the design criteria we use. Presently, there's no stormwater mitigation on the site at all. So when that big flood comes, there's nothing protecting it. And so now we're going to have some improvements and mitigate what's already there. Traffic, fence removal. The people that live over here, if getting into this area, if there's an existing fence there, that is not a problem too. It will probably have to be removed, and then since we're the applicant, we have to replace the fence. Fence is a reasonable thing to have on a property line.
And to make sure, just to make sure that the McCormicks understand as well, that when you go in and you gut out the big hole, you replace all the ground and you resod and refill and make it look like as it was before it was disturbed, correct?
You can't make it look like exactly what it was before it was disturbed, but you can't leave a mess, and you have to touch everything up. And so if there is a fence there, it needs to be replaced. If there was if there was some landscaping, that needs to be replaced. If there was a building sitting on top of it, and I don't believe there is, that's different because that's an encroachment on an existing easement. So, but I don't think that's the case. So I don't think we have to worry about that. But anything, obviously, approved uses for an area that has an easement will be replaced.
And I'm sure that you have a business card on you that you'd be happy to give the McCormick so that they could answer any more questions that they may
Certainly,
have.
at least make sure they have my contact information.
Okay, great.
Yep.
And so can you discuss this, the 25-foot tree? I guess let's start off this way. I know that you're just the developer and that you may not be the one that is building the houses on the lots.
That's correct.
But in your estimation, are you looking at a one-story or a two-story? What do you think that the market's going to bring to that area?
The market's going to bring, it's going to bring two-story, and it's the economic time we live in. Actually, I did want to follow up because there was some concern over home value, and that's a reasonable thing to bring up. I'm from Redmond, so I live on the other side of the mountains, but I've worked with the applicant for a very long time, and I work for him because I enjoy working for him. And in terms of the relative world of home builders, he builds a nice product. Now, that's my opinion for whatever it's worth, but there are a lot of different types of developers in the world, and I enjoy working for this particular builder because he puts something good in there. And yes, when it's disturbed, when there's contractors, when there's excavators, there is disruption. I would not say that there isn't. But in the long term, a nice home with good neighbors, that is going to complement the area better than something that was kind of slapped together and then somebody who kind of threw it together and just ran and said, the heck with it. And so in my opinion, this property is in better hands.
Sorry, I have one more question. Our stormwater expert is unfortunately not here tonight, so for the rest of us laymen, maybe you can provide a little additional clarification. The retention pond that you're showing next to lot 11.
That's correct. Over here?
Correct. It appears to me that that is roughly 20 feet higher in elevation than certain parts of the property, if I'm reading the topography correct. That's sort of the kind of the crest of the hill on the property?
The high point is in the middle here. You are correct that there are some parts over here that won't get over there. So for stormwater, we have, let's just work with the street for the time being. If you have questions about the homes, we can get to that. So we have areas that flood off this way, and we have areas that will flood off this way, and this area will go this way. So the pond contains this area here. Clackamas County West has some infrastructure here that we can drain into. We just have to model it and show that it's compliant by them. The point that you're bringing up that's important is we have a reasonable amount of the street that will end up here, and that's where the topography goes. That's where we have an inlet or two at the end of the cul-de-sac that will drain to a dry well or an infiltration device. And then in the event of a very large rainstorm, we have an overflow pipe underground that can connect through this storm drainage easement to the existing storm drainage infrastructure that the city already has. And it's I would assume because we use this, the city of Milwaukie uses the city of Portland stormwater manual. We have to analyze this downstream conveyance and make sure that water can fit in down there. Otherwise, what's the point? That thing's going to flood and be a mess for everybody.
But it's all gravity-fed systems.
It's a gravity-fed system. We aren't proposing any pumping.
Okay. Thank you.
And then can you discuss the concerns that the public have had about the 25-foot barrier and what kind of the ideas that would look like, along with the spacing between the 15 feet and the lot line?
Okay. So 15 feet and the lot line, it's tight, but it's been done, and this would not be the first place where a 15-foot rear setback has been accomplished. We do need to put in some improved landscaping. The best time to do that is when the home, or after the home is shortly after construction, and to get it growing. We're not going to probably put cedar back there because cedar's spread out and that would not accomplish anything. We're looking at a type of tree species that is a little bit slender in stature and something that would grow well, because at the same time, as many of the people expressed concerns about the privacy here, these people that live here, well, I want some buffer too. And so if they're going to purchase a place, even though they're looking down, but the same thing, they don't want somebody looking up at them. So it is going to be, for the value of our development, to get some landscaping, but it's going to have to be a species that works. We could do arborvitae, but arborvitae has kind of a limitation on height and not everyone likes them. But my anticipation is some trees that grow fast, are slender, and can help create that barrier that everybody wants.
We don't have a specific tree species already planned out yet.
I do not. Okay. Elm comes to mind, but part of that is having some flexibility on this is available, this works right now, something that fits at the current time. So,
okay. Any other questions for the applicant? All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Brett, can we have you up here for some clarifying questions as well, please? First of all,
I'll field your questions, and then I have some responses to some of the questions that come up as
well. You want to do the responses first, because maybe you'll answer the questions.
Sure. questions about traffic and a traffic impact study are fair. I think as Hayes noted, I mean, this area is zoned for low-density residential use. The site is a relatively large site, 2.5 acres. There is a minimum lot size. It's in an area that, as he noted, is already, a larger area that's already developed, at least on several of the sides of it. There are some large vacant properties that will probably develop as well in the future. And so it is true to say that when you create new lots and have new houses, there will be some new trips, especially we're, requiring a new street connection. And so all the questions and concerns about whether there will be some trips cutting through on streets where they maybe hadn't because they couldn't, and because there are new houses here are all fair. But in terms of that question of a trigger or threshold, relatively speaking, 11 new lots in the middle of a large residential area was not deemed to generate enough impact to warrant a traffic impact study. There, like we've seen with other applications, there are some existing problems with the surrounding road infrastructure, speeding, clear vision issues, cut-through traffic, lack of sidewalks and pedestrian facilities. And it is true, again, that whenever you add even one more house and one more trip, there's, you could argue there's one more chance of something happening. But I think it's also important to keep in mind the scope of the proposal and to try to define a little bit where there is and where there's not responsibility, I guess, for dealing with some of those problems. So speeding on Maplehurst and a hard turn on Maplehurst, yes, and it sounds like there are problems already, and I understand the concern about, well, what about adding another street nearby? Yes, there's some greater potential for trouble. In terms of the access spacing for the city code and the spacing requirements for local streets, like we're talking about here, the requirement is 100 feet. And the proposed connection of the new street onto Maplehurst is more than 100 feet from the curve on Maplehurst and more than 100 feet from Charles Street. It's not as far as we'd like it to be from Catalina Lane. And again, given the nature of the development in the area, and particularly Catalina Lane being a dead-end street as well, the consideration was that it was an acceptable impact.
I might add just a couple things there. It's not the responsibility of a new development to solve the problems of the transportation problems of a neighborhood necessarily. So, I mean, they're responsible for sort of mitigating the impacts that they might generate. And in this particular instance, this development will have sidewalks and adequate streets. So it's mitigating those direct impacts on the adjacent street. The advantage here, and one thing it does do, is it provides some connectivity that provides options for traffic to go either way. So it's not dumping all trips on one street or the other street. It's creating that connectivity that all of our policies seek to establish. So those are just two points, I think, about the transportation system that are positives. Or at least the second point is a positive. The first one is, for properties in the city, our engineering department has a program to put in sidewalks, and on the city side, we've got where that's starting to happen throughout the community. With annexation, that could happen outside the city. I don't know that the county is in any position to try to put sidewalks in on any of those streets. I doubt that will happen.
Shall I ask if you have traffic-related questions before I move on?
Sure. Anybody have any traffic questions?
I don't. I thought that was very well said. Thank you, Brad.
The stormwater the stormwater issue is one that, as you noted before, comes up with every development. And I guess I'd like to try again to explain. I think the concerns and questions are all reasonable and valid. I mean, that's when you're looking at proposed development, those are the kinds of questions that you like to see people asking. I think what I'd like to try to clarify and remind us of is that the city does have standards and requirements for dealing with stormwater. And as the applicant noted, our engineering department is responsible for making sure that that stormwater from the new impervious surface in the streets is dealt with adequately. And then, as with any residential property in the city, you're not allowed to dump your stormwater onto your neighbor's property. You have to deal with it on your site, and there are different ways that can be done. But it may sound a little overly rosy to say it won't be a problem, but I think it is fair to say there are requirements and standards for dealing with stormwater that this proposal has to meet. And what they've shown so far with the preliminary plan is that there's capacity to do that. And I guess I would explain a little bit, part of what, I don't think it's probably going to end up quite being done the way the applicant has proposed, as was noted with a large, a detention pond here in this area, and then they're proposing dry wells here. I think probably what's going to end up happening is we're going to get some in these landscape strips that are between the street and the sidewalk. We'll get some bioswales, so we'll be getting some treatment and infiltration along the street network. And then, rather than having dry wells here, I think to deal with any overflow, I think our push is going to be to make this connection to the existing storm system in 64th, so that we're not having the maintenance issues that are associated with dry wells at the end of the cul-de-sac. Depending on how swales are, where they're required and how large they are, that may mean that this pond is either smaller or doesn't need to happen at all. But I guess all that to say, the final details aren't clear yet, but the end result will be all of the runoff, kind of the normal runoff from the street system will be dealt with, whether it's in swales, if there's some kind of pond here as well, if there's, I think the proposal will be to have something capture and send through to our existing storm system in 64th. And then as for individual houses, they have to do what every house will have to do, which is capture your roof runoff and not spill it over onto your neighbor's property, whether you're higher or lower than them. So are there questions? Are there questions about the stormwater issue from you?
Brett, I just have a question kind of about the topography, I guess, which in visiting the site, I hadn't really, paid much attention to it, And so just from your experience in thinking about the topography of the site and the plans as they are, thinking about the higher and lower, do you feel that the applicant is properly addressing those issues with topography?
In a preliminary way, yes. Like I said, I think what has been proposed by the applicant, the specific details of it are probably going to end up being a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And I think what the applicant will have to do as part of the next phase as they prepare like a final stormwater management plan is they'll have to do, actual infiltration tests and consider all those topography issues as we figure out what exactly gets built where. For example, and I'm not exactly sure where the topography changes are, but for, there was a note that some things in this area are going to drain here, and that's part of why there's a proposal for capturing a lot of that in a pond. And that, again, that may end up being the solution for that portion of the site. I do think we're going to probably be trying to get some bioswales in the land as part of the landscaping strip along here. So again, whether those end up meaning that the pond is a little bit smaller, or goes away entirely, it remains to be seen. But there'll be, where the topography sends the water in different directions, it will have to be dealt with. And I think because of the break here, that's probably part of the reason why they start with proposing a pond here and dry wells on this end. So I think that all that to say the topography gets accounted for with the final stormwater management plan, showing how it's actually going to be, what the actual expected infiltration is, and the volumes, and how they're being dealt with. Okay. I'm not sure that I have anything to add to what the applicant said about impacts to property values. I mean, that's again a great question. It's one that's really hard for anyone to answer specifically. It's obviously, different to live at the end of a dead-end street than on a through street. And if you're in a situation where you are effectively at the end of a dead-end street and that obviously changes your experience in the area. Again, there are pros and cons to connectivity. And
I'm not sure how it fits into the criteria.
Yeah,
perfectly either.
Well, right. It may not have a home in the criteria, but I guess just to address the concern, it's a fair question, and it's one that's hard to answer. By living in a more established neighborhood, with other homes, does that improve my value? Does it make my lot more redevelopable? It can go. I guess it can go both ways, and that's hard to say. The question about the landscaping and privacy. Again, it's a fair one, and that's why our suggestion as a condition was to provide some kind of landscaping screen along the periphery of the property. And I think our suggestion was, and I'll read the condition just so everyone can hear what it is, was to be as specific as possible without narrowing things down too much, so that the applicant would have some options to come up with something that would be workable. So the suggested condition was, and our proposal with this, because we're dealing right now with the applicant, and as is noted, the applicant may not be the one who builds the homes, and we'd like to get this nailed down before we get into the home building part. So our suggestion with this condition and its placement is with respect to the final plat. That is, right now we're having preliminary approval of these lots, and if this gets approved, the next step for the applicant is to construct the street, build the infrastructure, and conduct the final surveys to actually establish individual lots that can then be sold. And before we get to that point where the lots could be sold, our suggestion was to have this condition about the landscaping so that it gets taken care of all at once. And what it says is the requirement would be to install plantings along the property boundaries adjacent to residential lots outside the proposed developments. That is all the way around the site. The plantings shall be of species that are expected to achieve a height of 25 feet within 5 years of planting, and shall be spaced sufficiently to provide a visual screen with 50% opacity, or being 50% clear, for at least half of the year between the proposed development and adjacent properties. Plantings may be evergreen or deciduous, but shall not be listed as nuisance species on the city's native plant list. So there may be some ideas about how to tweak that to get a little bit more at some of the concerns that have been raised. We thought it was a good start for trying to clarify a height, or set a height expectation and a time expectation by which we'd have that standard, and also to try to give some idea of how, we didn't suggest that it should be a complete screen that you can't see at all the house on the other property, but that it should be 50% opaque, and maybe you want to do a different percentage, but to allow for some flexibility so that they can figure out, like he was suggesting, maybe they need to be kind of a thinner, not spreading out tree, so that there's still some room for the houses to be built back there. But that's the language that we suggested, if you want to work with that.
So does that mean that screening is only supposed to be for 6 months out of the year, or is it supposed to be for all year?
Well, I think, and again, you can adjust this if you'd like. If you choose an evergreen option, obviously, the expectation is that it will be there all year. And if you want to get specific about excluding certain species like evergreen but not arborvitae, we can write that in as well. I think the idea about it was, again, to try to set an expectation that for at least half the year there would be this 50% screen, depending on what happens with leaves and whatnot. As the trees grow, obviously there is some physical structure of the tree there. So again, yes, it may be a little bit less at some points of the year. If you think that it needs to be dialed in to be a little more specific or a little more rigorous, that's totally fair. It's just a starting point.
We thought that it made sense to provide deciduous trees there too. So you get some sunlight in the winter, and when you're using backyards in the summer, you've got some screening, as opposed to just going with evergreen screening.
Right, and this, to follow up on Denny's point, I mean, the development does have two sides where I'm planting a screen here on the south. As was noted, this is a little higher elevation, and shading and shadowing, because it's to the north of these properties, is probably not as big of an issue if I'm trying to get some solar exposure to my house. That might be a bigger issue for properties here. Now I've got a 25-foot evergreen screen, and I was trying to get, or I had some good southern light coming into the house. Now I don't. Thanks for the screen, kind of. So I mean, again, it's a little bit hard to maybe dial it in exactly. But again, maybe you have some ideas, and maybe there could be some more specificity about north or south sides for that.
I'm also not a tree expert. A 25-foot deciduous tree, what kind of a canopy spread would that have typically?
Well, I think it depends on the species. There are columnar trees that you could plant more columnar trees or less trees that have a bigger spread, but with the smaller distance that we're working in, we've just got a 15-foot backyard. They'll generally have to be columnar type trees, I think. So we weren't going to design it for them.
Sure.
We just tried to come up with some guidelines.
And how do you do a 50% opaque with arborvitae? You know how arborvitae grow, right? They kind of bush and then they grow all together.
Right. Well, if you wanted to stick with that 50% standard, I mean, I think, again, it's worded so that there's space sufficiently to provide a visual screen. Now, and it does say with 50% opacity, so I guess if to strictly hear that, the idea would be, well, if you're going to use something like arborvitae, you can't plant them next to each other if you're supposed to have some openness as well. But I guess that language of with spacing to provide that certain degree of opacity, the idea was, well, depending on what species I pick, that may dictate how many trees or how they're spaced based on how they're going to grow or what their shape is. So again, if you want to fiddle with a little bit of that language so that it, if you want to make it absolutely, only 50%, so that there is some openness, or at least 50%, so that, hey, if they decide to screen it off entirely, they can do that. We can adjust.
Okay. Do you have any other?
I guess the last thing I would just say about the easements for sewer and stormwater that go across the adjacent properties just to the west, and that those easements will be extended onto at least lot 7. I mean, we'll be getting an easement across this new lot and maybe lot 6, because obviously the lines have to go from the new development across here. I don't know what the specific language of the easement is, the easements that are in place right now for storm and for sewer, in terms of what they say about an expectation of repairing to a certain degree, or who pays for what. I don't know how specific that language is. But for better or worse, we have easements in place, and in terms of addressing at least the stormwater concern, that will allow us to connect to our storm.
Right, and that easement was there when they bought that property, or?
I assume either it was in place when they bought the property, or they were part of the negotiation.
Negotiation for it, okay.
I think that's all the points I have, but if you have other questions.
Any questions for Mr. Kevler? All right. I thank you, sir. Nope. You can do that right from there. The public testimony portion of this hearing on file S2017-003 and VR 2017-010 is now located subdivision located at 1159 Southeast Maplehurst Road is now closed. Is the commission ready for discussion?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So I think that we have heard probably 4 items that we've heard the traffic suggestion, we've heard the screening suggestion, the easement issues. I don't think that we can touch the economic impact. And runoff. Is there anything else that anybody wants to discuss beyond that?
Setbacks, setback variance.
Oh, the variance on the setbacks as well. But the reason why we're having this hearing. Commissioner Travis, would you like to start?
So the one thing that I was thinking about is, that this property is right on the border of, unincorporated Clackamas County, which is, we've seen recent applications similar to this with, the same kind of issues, with issues around narrow streets and not a lot of pedestrian facilities, obviously. I mean, so it's similar. It reminds me of similar to a recent application. And so I guess thinking about that, right, it's at the edge of our city, bounding, unincorporated Clackamas County, and thinking about the discussion with staff around, who's responsible for that, how do you deal with that? Because it definitely adds to an already not great situation out there. So I'm just bringing that up as that's on my mind in terms of understanding the impacts that this has for this neighborhood that is right on the border.
What I would like to do is I would like to make a suggestion to planning staff to carry on a message to the engineering department that they would go out here, because there seems to be concerns of speeding and non-traffic mitigation that already exist, and maybe ask the engineering department, whoever's in charge of, I don't know, stop signs or whatever, I'm assuming it's the engineering department, goes out there and just passes on this message and just says, hey, we go out there and kind of take a look around, because there seems to be some traffic mitigation that needs to happen around there. I think that the neighbors would appreciate that, and if nothing comes of it, then they know that they can email the engineering department and constantly ask them, if that is the correct department.
Well, and the other thing is to bring this up to the Public Safety Advisory Committee as well, and see if there's a way to do some testing, put the speed signs that we do in, certain neighborhoods, and they can be moved. So maybe it's time to have something out in this neighborhood.
So I would like to let you all know, for some of you that are in Clackamas County and not in the city, that we have a PSAC committee, which is basically about ranking places where to put in sidewalks, and they are going through that process now. Please, that would be helpful to join in that conversation.
No, they've pretty much decided, I think, priorities for where they're doing sidewalks right now.
Oh, well.
I don't know I couldn't tell you exactly what they are, but I know that process has happened.
So for your citizens, that you have a PSAC representative in your neighborhood, and they do hold public meetings too as well.
So that's really I think the main thing that's on my mind is just thinking about that kind of dilemma of doing this big infill project right on the edge of our city limits. And it's definitely not as big as other applicants we've seen, proposing a lot more density. So, it's reasonable. It's within the R7 allowances on all of it. So I just bring up the border traffic thing. But I think these were good suggestions to think about how we can help improve those conditions.
Commissioner Grau?
I think I would echo what Kim said about the traffic mitigation. I'm sure that's frustrating for the residents, and it's a little cramped in there already. So even if they put, even if they put the traffic calming lines in the road, I don't know, but I would agree with having engineering go out there. As for stormwater management, again, our stormwater management guy is not here, but I trust that the planning staff will have the engineers come up with a solid stormwater management mitigation plan. And I think the last thing I would just say is that I think I'd probably put some language in there that said at least 50% with as far as the screening goes. I get the sunlight in the winter thing, but if your privacy is only half the year, I don't really get the point. So those were my concerns.
Commissioner Jones?
Okay. I'll sort of go through this by bullet points. My first one, traffic. I think there were a lot of valid points brought up by the community tonight about the traffic challenges in this area. I hope that those are heard, and I appreciate the suggestion by Chair Hamer of reaching out to PSACs, having engineering take a look at this. I think that unfortunately our opportunity for enforcement regarding this particular application is somewhat limited as far as what we could actually do in moving forward that would have a tangible impact as far as creating stop signs, creating speed bumps, slowing down traffic on existing arterials, things like that, while still acknowledging that 11 new homes, 22 new cars, 44 trips, there is an impact there, but it sounds like it flies under the threshold for a traffic impact study. So I'm just not sure what we could tangibly do for that. The screening, I think there was some good discussion about that. I appreciate what you said, Commissioner Grau, about is 50% the right number? I don't know. But I think that a screening condition is important to this aspect, and think that that should be a part of the development responsibility and not the home building responsibility. The easement, I think that's a condition of the site. I don't know how much discussion there is for that necessarily. Stormwater mitigation, again, Mr. Kelver, I appreciated what you said about that. I like the addition of the bioswales. I think that if this is a gravity-fed system, there needs to be some extra consideration for the home sites, for the street, for the sidewalks, all the runoff. I'm not a stormwater expert. It sounds like the city has a good plan for how to approach this. The fifth item here, the compound line variance, I don't see an issue with that necessarily. The issue that I do have, my final bullet point, is the 15-foot rear yard setback. Based on the testimony from tonight and based upon the information that we have in front of us, I would not vote in favor of that variance. I don't have a scale with me, but just doing some rough math on these plot plans, it appears that the home building sites are roughly 3,500, 4,500 square foot. Just looking at it out of the blue, a large single family home would have maybe a footprint of 2,000 square feet. So it seems like there's not a significant amount of impact that would necessitate the addition of approximately 250 to 500 square feet of potential home building site per lot, which is what you would gain by the extra 5-foot variance. It's my personal and professional opinion that granting that variance would put the undue burden of site constraints on the adjacent property owners and not on the applicant. I recognize, I guess I understand the condition around the putting the sidewalk easement on the property, but I feel like with this being an R7 site and not an R5 or an R2.5, that impact isn't as substantial as you would have in an R5 or an R2.5 setting, and that pushing or giving the opportunity to push these home sites to 15 foot from the property line, like Denny said, limits the type of deciduous plantings that you can put in for screening, limits the usability of the backyards, and pushes these homes against adjacent property owners in a manner that I don't think is consistent with the character of R7 development. And I think that in order to approve a variance on that, our approval criteria is, does it meet or exceed the general standard that is set forth, and I don't believe that this would in this case.
Would you be in favor of allowing the variance for the front, so that you would only have a 15-foot setback in the front, since the applicant is giving up 5 feet of their own land for the sidewalks?
Would the applicant want that?
I think the applicant would be happier to be able to maximize the amount of square footage that they could. To them, they presented the problem of is that, well, if you are only 15 feet from the front, right, that you would limit the parking of a vehicle in their driveway. And do we have rules of how long a driveway has to be from the street?
We do.
The garage, isn't there a garage setback from the property line of 20?
Well, no, not exactly. I mean, I think our design standards for single-family homes say that you can't have the garage sticking out farther than the front face of the house unless there's a covered front porch or something that it's in line with. But I don't believe there's a minimum requirement.
Of a driveway length?
If you're thinking of something else specific.
There's building code requirements for how long your driveway can be that are relevant to the home building, the home construction, but not the development of the property.
The main thing is that you want to have enough room between the garage door so that you're not going to be having the car parked across the sidewalk.
Right, which is what the applicant noted.
So.
Right, which you're going to assume that it's 15. I mean, I guess the garage could be set back an extra 5 feet. You just can't have what they call a snout house, which is that the garage is 8 feet in front of, or 6 feet in front of, whatever that, it's 4 feet or something like that. And there's no rule against setting the garage back from the
Our codes today sort of prevent the snout house.
Correct. That's what I'm saying.
But I guess I'm confused. If we were to go or suggest a 15-foot front yard variance, then that would, I feel like, encourage that.
The point would be is that is there enough room for somebody that has their garage door closed to be able to park a vehicle there without parking it into the sidewalk or into the street is the question. And that's why that they would prefer to do the setback in the back, have the variance in the back then instead of the front. The other issue is that you have a continuity view from the road as well, that if everybody has a 20-foot setback, then you may not notice it in the back, right? You won't notice it in the backyard versus the front yard, at least from public right-of-way view.
Yes.
So, I mean, I'm not... I would like, what I envision on this setback is that it doesn't matter to me if it's to the front or to the back, but I think that we should give them back their 5 feet that they are giving us public right of way.
Mr. Chairman, I think that, and I would need to do a little more looking at your code, but typically anyway, the Planning Commission could not grant a variance that wasn't applied for, and they did not apply for a front yard variance. Now, certainly if the Planning Commission was to deny the rear yard setback and otherwise approve the application and gave an indication that the Planning Commission would favorably look at a front yard variance, the applicant could then come in and apply for that. But it's not really part of the application, wasn't part of the criteria noticed in the application, and then there are issues about complying with the criteria for a front yard variance. Okay. So I think it would be more an indication to the applicant that that's an option that the Planning Commission might favorably consider.
Okay. Thank you.
Can we talk a little bit more about the setbacks and the character of R7 properties that you mentioned? So you're saying that the 15-foot setback is not in the character of R7. And I'm just, I guess, struggling a little bit to to find where we have that. I mean, we, you know.
Like actually in writing?
Yeah, right.
That's fair. I can't point to that explicitly.
Yeah, right.
I would say subjectively that the character of R7 would be additional separation between homes.
Right.
It's medium density.
Mm-hmm.
And to Chair Hammer's point, you're in this proposal with maximum utilization of the subdivision.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a decreased setback at the front, then you will have that perceived increased density at the front from the public right-of-way on Southeast Silas Street,
Mm-hmm.
future street, or at the back with a 15-foot rear yard setback. My perspective is just that in creating something new as the applicant, I would rather see those site limitations be reflected in the proposed design as something that is absorbed by the applicant in a sense rather than absorbed by the neighborhood.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Can I get a clarification on the rules of sidewalks and streets and so on and so forth? Did they propose the sidewalk onto their property and give it back? I guess they're not giving it back. Is it because of the extra landscape strip, or is it because the width of the street caused it, or?
Yeah, I think what I understand from the engineering department's review of how do we get a workable public street or streets through this property, the engineering department identified some of the minimum dimensions or minimum features that would be needed. We obviously need travel lanes. The determination was that there needed to be on-street parking as well. Obviously curbs, curb and gutter on the sides, and then a minimum landscape strip on either side. And obviously we want sidewalks as well. The code allows, again, like I mentioned earlier, the code would prefer to see all these improvements be in the public right-of-way. It does specifically allow the engineering director to grant them to be on private property in a public access easement. So that's a specific allowance for sidewalks. And I think the current engineering director has been looking at that as an option where we have kind of some either limited or potentially limited rights of way. If the street right-of-way had been widened by 5 or 6 feet on either side to get the sidewalks in the public right-of-way, that would essentially make the whole development unworkable, because now we've lost, all the lots are not meeting the depth standard. They're probably not meeting the lot area standard. The site's falling under the minimum density requirement. And so what was worked out, as again, the applicant noted in conversation with the city and the engineering department, was providing these minimal travel lanes, on-street parking, landscape strip, and then basically, I guess if I'm not speaking out of turn with respect to what the attorney would say, I mean, I think, kind of the trade-off for being able to do the development and get a workable public street in, given the city's flexibility with some of those features, was to provide the required pedestrian facilities in an easement on the properties. So if it's maybe fair to say that's part of the trade-off of being able to do the development, was to give up some of each lot to have the required facility. So
does the beginning of the easement, I'm sorry, how do I put this? Does the 6 feet that becomes an easement, does that count as the front yard for the setback of the door?
No.
Or do you take away that 6-foot easement?
Yes. So you, to figure out where the front yard setback requirement for this zone is 20 feet, and you start measuring at the property line, even where there's a public access easement in this case.
So the houses are already a little bit closer,
right,
to the the front than they would be.
Right, so in this case, so starting at the boundary between the public right-of-way and the property line, the first 6 feet are eaten up by this public access easement where we're going to have a 5-foot sidewalk with 6 inches on either side. And then, the applicant would only have to set the houses back 14 more feet from the back of our easement, rather than having to go 20 feet back from the 6-foot easement. So that's why they indicated they've chosen to maintain effectively a 20-foot setback from not effectively, literally a 20-foot setback from the back of the easement. So the houses are actually 26 feet or so from the boundary, from the property boundary and the right-of-way boundary.
Right, so it gives the illusion of it creates from the edge of the sidewalk to the lawn 20 feet.
Right, when I'm on the sidewalk, I feel like I'm probably in the public right-of-way. I don't feel like I'm on your private property, even though I am, but I'm in a public easement. So the feeling that they're proposing is to still have 20 feet back from the sidewalk.
So my question is that if we don't grant that variance to the 15 feet in the back, then they would still be allowed to build 5 feet closer towards the sidewalk without going through a variance process?
Correct.
Okay. So in other words, if I think that what really regards the question of the easement to the back, I think that you make a very relatively decent point about the privacy and the character of the surrounding neighbors. I think that was eloquently stated. It seems like to me that if we don't grant that setback, that per our rules, there doesn't need to be a variance to come back for the setback in the front. But it sounds like that we're going to get a trade-off, right? Do you lose the character of the neighborhood in the front, or do you lose the character of the neighborhood in the back?
But I think that that's based on an assumption of full utilization of the building site.
Let's just say that the person that is creating the product is going to maximize the amount of space that they can to make it to gain the maximum amount of profitability, regardless of what we do. So the trade-off was that, well, why don't you guys give me 15 feet in the back instead of the 20, and then that way I don't have to be so close to the sidewalk in the front to maintain the character of the neighborhood. So I guess my question is that when we look at this variance, what's going to be more important, the character to the front or the character to the back? And that's really what, I don't really care what the answer is. I really don't. I mean,
yeah. I think that I still feel that 20 feet in the rear is important, and that the site conditions of the narrow site are the responsibility of the applicant.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Could somebody still park a car in the driveway without being in the sidewalk?
We'll ticket them if they do.
Well, my question is that it sounds like there's going to be some on-street parking, available for...
You could add a condition that the garage has to be 20 feet behind the sidewalk, or 18 feet behind the sidewalk.
I mean, I think that coupled with the fact that there's on-street parking available, I would be perfectly fine with keeping the 20-foot setback in the back as long as there's enough room to park in the front if somebody has, a couple people over and there's a couple cars besides their own, if they can't, if they're not parking in the garage, they're parking in the front, there's room for parking, I would be fine with that. I think you make a compelling argument to keep the 20-foot setback in the back.
Well, all right. I don't know if we have an automotive expert on this panel, but does anybody know what the typical length of a car is?
I don't think there is a typical length of the car.
I don't think so either.
Well, maybe we'll all be driving Easy-Goes, so they're only 4 feet long, I guess.
We'll just make that a condition.
That they have to have an Easy-Go car to be able to live there? Commissioner Grau, the idea that was set forth, and I want to know that if you are on board with this, is that you want to put a condition on to set back the garage so that a vehicle can be able to park without crossing into the public right-of-way, or are you just okay with the way it would land?
I would like the condition for the setback of the garage so that cars parking in the driveway aren't parked in the middle of the sidewalk.
Okay. Commissioner Travis, we've come up with a couple of things. What is your feelings and thoughts?
I'm convinced on the character of R7, so I think I'm on board with that, to not approve the variance. The parking, I'm less concerned. I guess thinking about it being a cul-de-sac, it's not as big of an issue for me to put a condition on there for the parking in the driveway, not to cover the sidewalk, but I can go with it if others feel strongly.
Commissioner Jones, I believe that you have at least two on board with you that would say that we do not allow the approval of the setback to 15 feet, that it would have to remain at the 20. Do you have any thoughts or feelings about conditioning a length of a driveway or a setback of a garage?
Not inherently. I'm a little bit curious from staff if that's a condition that we can impart on this level of development, or is. I don't
see why not.
Okay.
What would it be tied to, I guess? If a variance for the rear yard setback is denied, the other variances in play are for lot depth, access spacing for the road, and the compound line thing. So where would a...
But you have a narrower, they're shallower lots. They're not as deep, and you have a sidewalk that's on the property. So, I mean, I think that's totally justified to make sure that the cars are parked.
I guess I'll defer to Dan. I don't disagree with the logic. I just wonder, what is it tied to? Because it is a condition, and what's the finding that it would be tied to that's warranting the requirement about the driveway length if there's no variance tied to it?
Well, what I'm hearing is that there's a concern that because the sidewalk is on the private property and therefore is taking up part of the front yard, the Planning Commission has a concern that might create conflicts between the vehicle and the sidewalk if the garage is that close. Right. And I think that's an impact that the Planning Commission has the authorities to address.
But I don't think that there's no special request to put, you don't need a special request to put unless the engineering director finds that the only way he would allow the sidewalk to be on the private property in an easement would be with such a condition. I guess that would be the way to tie it. Otherwise, it seems like it's all, the lots are, except for the couple of them, all meeting the lot depth standard, so there's no special request for that. So maybe it would just be with the engineering, and we'd have to check the code on that, I guess, the engineering director's allowance for, I'll let you have the sidewalk on private property in an easement if...
You've got, the proposal here is for a 20-foot front yard setback. There's no increase to the setbacks, but we're allowing the sidewalk to be into that setback. So to ensure that you've got enough space in front of the garage, you need a condition. It seems really clear to me. So
I'm just not sure where to tie it and which of the findings to link it to.
Well, I guess one of the questions is the, I mean, the Planning Commission is basically approving this design, and that design shows that sidewalk on the property. And so I think that the Planning Commission has the authority to say, we think this design creates an issue in terms of the potential interference with the sidewalk. I guess the question would be, what if, for example, I guess is the issue that the Planning Commission may not have the authority to say you can't put that sidewalk on private property, you have to put it in the right-of-way. And they're approving this design. I think.
Well, then we're going to be in a situation where we need variances to the lot sizes,
right,
and the depth.
Right.
So, I mean,
I mean, we could take that. We could take that direction if that's where the commission wants to go, and maybe continue it with that direction of, you know, clarifying how the findings would be adjusted and inserting a condition that would.
I don't think it's that difficult. We can write a finding right now, and they can adopt it.
Okay. If
we have a 5-minute break.
See, and you thought all this stuff was so easy and everything just right? We're all just sitting here thinking, oh my goodness, glad we're not those three, right?
Staff report.
Can I also clarify or ask if the inclination of the commission is to not allow the variance for the rear yard setback, the condition for plantings and screenings around the periphery was tied directly to that as a way to mitigate the impact of that. So if that variance is denied, it seems that unless you find another place to tie that the planting part would either go away or would need to find another way to come in as an impact.
What? Say that again.
So the reason, if we just talk about the request to go to 15 feet in the rear, the findings that we wrote for you said, we think that's supportable, and in addressing the approval criteria saying that you've mitigated the impacts of this 20 to 15 foot variance, one condition was, one way to mitigate that is to require plantings. But if you're not approving the variance, then there's no impact to be mitigated unless you find another way to say.
Oh, I see. So then you can just eliminate the plantings anyways.
That condition would seem
we're considering multiple variances here.
No. Well,
right.
Here's what happens. We're looking at the subdivision in amongst itself as a plan, and in that so you would look at that and imagine no planting strip. Then what happens is that they come in with a variance that say, oh, we'll allow you to have 15 feet in the rear, and the trade-off will be is that we give you the planting strip, right? So we can approve, if we don't approve the variance, then there's no reason to have a planting strip. Because that's the reason why the condition of finding is that we improved the neighborhood by putting in a planting strip, and that's why we're granting the variance.
I think that even more specifically, the issue is what code standard addresses rear yard landscaping in the absence of a variance. And I think what staff's indicating is there's probably not one.
I mean, the other, the most relevant one is probably the lot depth variance, and that applies to 3 of the 11 lots. So it would be lots 5, 9, and 11 would be the ones that you're still considering the lot depth variance for, and then you could find, I guess, that there was a need for some landscaping to deal with the lot depth issue. Whereas the rear yard setback one applied to all of the lots because it was requested for all of the lots.
Okay, so I'm going to take a straw poll, and this is just about, and I think all we need to do is say we don't want the 15-foot variance, and then the rules can be rewritten from there. So I'm going to take a straw poll. Commissioner Travis, do you want 15 or 20 feet in the back?
I'm inclined to not approve the variance for the setback. So yes, 20 feet.
Can I ask a question of Commissioner Jones before?
Yes.
Okay. what do you feel is more important in your professional opinion, the extra 5 feet in the rear or the screening?
Well, that's, I'm confused now. So if we don't approve the variance for the 15-foot rear yard setback, then the planting strip on the proposed southeast Silas Street goes away.
Sorry.
It doesn't necessarily go.
Yeah,
that's what.
No.
Yeah, not planting. I guess when you're right. We usually when we're talking about planting strips, we're talking about landscape strips that are on either side of the street, and that's not. We're talking about the landscape screening along the rear yards of all the properties. That's what goes away. Not the street features with the 3-foot landscape strip on either side.
Right. So my question is, in the rear of the property, do you think the adjacent homes would rather have an extra 5 feet back there, or would they rather have the canopy screening from the plantings?
I'm curious about why there can't be a landscape requirement.
As am I.
Well, so
if what the finding is the character of the neighborhood are 1-story homes, these are going to be 2-story homes. There's a need for some additional buffering. These lots, in fact, are the narrowest, the shallowest lots that you can find in the zone. Why can't you find that?
Is that what the code says?
Well, yeah.
Compatibility with an adjoining neighborhood is a
For just a subdivision? I mean, if we back up for a second and say, let's forget any variance requests, and if I'm just proposing a subdivision, I have to show you how it meets the R7 standards. I guess we'd have to double check that land division part of the code to see if, since the subdivision is a discretionary decision, which is why you're hearing it, is there some criterion for approval that says, I know you're meeting all the minimum standards for the R7 zone, but I still think it's not compatible with the neighborhood. I'm not sure.
I would think that the clear and objective requirement would preclude that. We could take a break and take a look at the code, but I would be surprised.
I mean, it does, of course, raise the question of if it is supposed to, if just the subdivision by itself is supposed to be so clear and objective, why is the Planning Commission hearing it, and what discretion do they have, if any? That's a fair question.
Big issue in land use right now, but
we could.
I come from an old school system where you used to be able to condition things, and I'm still having trouble adjusting.
The courts have been very clear that in order to condition something, you have to tie it to a standard, and the standard cannot be really a discretionary standard. Like codes used to say things like, how does this impact the livability of the neighborhood, or is this compatible with the adjoining properties? And those provisions are uniformly thrown out now because state law says that housing, that the state needs more housing, and therefore you can have standards that would allow you to deny housing, but they have to be clear and objective. And so we would need to find that standard in the code.
So even though we are unanimously in favor of approving conclusion A3, the variance for the compound lot lines, these conditions are not inherently tied to that variance.
That's so.
It might depend on which.
Sounds like there might be for at least some of the lots.
Which lots have variances might be a way we can get there.
Right. So there's only 3 lots that have the compound variance. So for those, you might be able to make a finding that says, yeah, in exchange for that compound lot variance, the landscaping in back somehow addresses the impacts of that variance.
Yeah, the compound lot variance applies to lots 6 and 8. The lot depth variance applies to lots 5, 9, and 11. So we'd be talking about 5, 6, 8, 9, and 11. So 5 of the 11 lots are subject to some kind of variance.
I'm sorry, I get 8, 7, and 6.
5 and 11.
6, it's not 7. 6, 8. 6 and 8 have the compound segments because they're on the cul-de-sac. 5 and 9 are, 5, 9, and 11 are not quite meeting the lot depth standard.
I think that the screening is probably much more important than the 5 feet, but I think that the real issue is the privacy, not so much the distance between the houses. Now, look, I can go the way that you guys are going, and sure, the homeowners to the rears will get their 5 feet, but they may or may not get a tree.
Yeah, I mean, if we lose the screening, I don't know that I'd be inclined to deny the variance.
So we could give the screening on 8 and 6.
I don't think that's enough. We need,
Well, right, I mean,
yeah.
you lose 5 and...
Almost
so-
the whole south
Yeah.
of the lot.
I am willing to take a 5-minute break, but what I don't want to do is have everything all rewritten if we're not in agreement. So is there anybody that is willing to go with Commissioner Grau and my argument that losing the screening is...
I'm really hesitant now that we, I think, fully understand the implications of this to go in either direction of this if-then statement without having further opportunity for the applicant and or the community to respond to that, because I guess in my opinion we're changing things fairly dynamically here.
Are you willing to suggest that we continue the hearing?
Could be.
Or reopen.
I mean, we're...
When you say reopen...
You could reopen the hearing for testimony tonight on these issues, or you could continue it if you felt like you needed more.
You mentioned earlier we're not close to the end of their application period.
I'm sorry?
Correct, yeah, we're not near, I think the 120-day clock gives us quite a bit more time.
Except that your next meeting on the 14th is a joint meeting with the council to look at.
So we could reopen public testimony, let the applicant and let the public respond to which one that they would prefer to see? Right.
Or ask the applicant if
Can I
he's
ask
willing
the
to do both.
specific? Can I ask the specific question to reopening?
Yeah, you could limit the testimony to this issue.
Okay.
Agree. I would agree with that.
Agree.
Okay. So here we go. All right. I'll put it in my terms so that we all understand. We're going to reopen the public testimony. Okay. So fill out your yellow card. Right. Same deal. And we are basically only going to reopen it to testimony regarding either the trade-off between the 20 feet in the back or the 15 feet with the screening. Everybody understand what that means? Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to take a, do I have to take a motion for the reopening?
That would be the better thing to do, yeah.
All right, so I'll take a motion for the reopening.
I move to reopen.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Grau, seconded by Commissioner Jones. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I would like to call a 5-minute recess to let the public and let staff have a minute maybe to talk with the applicant, make sure everybody's on the same page, right?
Not going later than 10. Just
Jesus. All right, here we go. I got to flip my page.
Gross.
File number S2017-003 and VR 2017-01 is reopened to the question of the 15-foot setback and the trade-offs there within. I believe that the applicant has created a revised proposal. May we hear the applicant first, please?
Hello, Hayes McCoy again. We'd like to propose two things. Regardless of whether you find in favor or against the rear variance, we would still propose that, and I'm going to read the condition and modify it slightly based on generally your feedback. We would still propose to install plantings along the property boundaries adjacent to residential lots outside the proposed development. The plantings shall be of species that are expected to achieve a height of 25 feet within 5 years of planting and shall be spaced sufficiently to provide a visual screen with at least 50% opacity for at least half of the year between the proposed development and adjacent properties. Plantings may be evergreen or deciduous, but shall not be listed as nuisance species on the city's native plant list. One thing that we ask for is that this be a condition at either certificate of occupancy or final inspection of the home, not at the time of final platting. The second thing is regarding the front, because there's been a lot of discussion of the front, that we would modify our proposal to have our garage setback 24 feet from the right-of-way, which is a little bit closer because we are losing the rear variance, but that helps us have a more buildable, more flexible footprint that we can utilize.
Can I just clarify that when you say garage setback, can we just be more general and say front, like the front yard setback? Because I mean, whether
Yes.
the garage is right there, we want to just be clear that somehow the garage would be at 24 feet and the front of the house would somehow come closer. I mean,
Okay, yes, the front setback included with the garage setback altogether. Okay.
So I think, just to clarify, I think what we have is, if the Planning Commission is inclined to deny the rear yard setback, the applicant would withdraw that variance request, and yet is offering to amend its proposal to include the landscaping anyway. As a result of the loss of the variance, then the applicant is requesting that the front yard setback be 24 feet from the curb, and that the applicant be allowed to install the landscaping prior to final inspection of the homes, rather than at the time of subdivision plat. So that's kind of where we're at.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's cool.
And if the Planning Commission is inclined to consider the applicant's proposal, we will need to provide an opportunity for testimony from the audience on that proposal, because the applicant is essentially modifying its application at this point.
And we can do that right here, right now,
Yes,
correct?
we could do that here right now. Yep.
Okay, so I want to make sure that I understand this correctly. The applicant is not withdrawing the idea of the 15-foot setback.
is withdrawing.
He is withdrawing the 15-foot setback. So we now have the 20-foot setback with the screen as per read, with the at the install at occupancy or at final inspection. And then 24 from the curb, which does not include the sidewalk or the landscape stripping. It is the curb, right?
Which is effectively an 18-foot setback from the end of the sidewalk. That about right?
Yes, that's what we're working toward.
Instead of, it was originally proposed 20 feet back from the back of the sidewalk.
Right. Okay. All right. So I think I got it. Any questions for the applicant? Okay. Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, so now public testimony, right? If everybody has understood, we've now kind of expanded it to the new proposal that is put in front of us. So if I call your name and if you don't want to say anything about it to that extent, then you can just say, I don't want to talk, okay? So first up is Mary and John Corrigan, sorry. My eyes get tired at the end.
Okay, I just want to make sure. That
I'm sorry, state your name and...
John Corrigan, 11134 Southeast 64th. I just want to make sure I understand this right. So now you're saying that the variance for the 15-foot in the back is gone, but you're still going to plant?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
And the trade-off is that he wants to be able to just be 18 feet from the sidewalk.
Gotcha.
Instead of 20 feet.
Okay. Okay, I think I'm good with that. I just want to bring up one thing. The houses on the north side of the development, probably the first three houses are up about 8 to 10 feet from where the land is in the development itself. So a 20-foot planting is only going to be about 10 foot up into their yards. And I don't know how you would get rid of, go a 30-foot tree or a 40-foot tree, but that would be kind of hard to do. But I just wanted to make sure you guys knew that.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Corrigan? All right.
Nope.
Thank you.
Next up is Linda Kleben.
Linda Kleben, 6635 Southeast Charles Street. The 20-foot with the landscaping barrier is acceptable. What I don't understand is when they were before, when was it going to be planted? And now it's further out that the planting will happen?
Yeah, so there are stages. So right now it would be basically kind of the last step before occupancy of the home. Before it would have been during the building of the development of the lots.
Okay. I would still prefer to have it during the building of the lots.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions?
No.
Thank you. I did say that, right? Okay. And then Ben Kopic. I got it wrong the first time. Trust me.
So I'm Ben Kopic, 6665 Southeast Charles Street, around the corner of Charles and Maplehurst. This is my first hearing, so thank you. I wanted to thank you for the care you're giving to this issue. It seems like something that we've kind of been talking around but not addressing is that this is a pretty small piece of land for what we're trying to do with it. And so what I keep hearing is that we're talking about a lot of different variances that we're asking for. I think this seems like a big improvement. I like the keeping the 20 feet and back seems like a good standard. It seems like it's there for a reason. So I think that's an improvement, what we just talked about. But just in general, there are a lot of variances being discussed. The variance with the street distance from Catalina, thank you. And that's a safety issue, and we already have concerns about traffic, so we're asking for variance, or the applicant is asking for variance there. There are variances with regard to where the houses can be placed on the lots. There are variances with regard to the shape of the lots and the lines. I don't know what those are for, but I'm guessing there's a good reason for that rule. So it just seems like at some point, when do you say, this is too many variances, why do we have to grant this many to make this an acceptable building project? Living near this property, I was super surprised that this was even a proposal. I had no idea you could fit that many houses in that space. And looking at the map, it seems like, yep, that's too much for that space. And hearing the variances that are being requested, it seems like, yep, that's too much for that space. So I guess I don't really know how these things go and how much judgment can be used here versus the rules. I'm surprised by it, and so just wanted to kind of bring that up as a point of discussion. Thanks.
Any questions for Mr. Kopic?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you. And then Scott Shelley? No? You're good? Okay. Any rebuttal from the applicant to the testimony?
We'll address why we asked about the timing of the screening. The reason is at the time of final plat, as you described, there's a street, but there's no home. So the screening serves no purpose because all that is there now is a street and there's no neighbors yet. But at the time of the home is when the screening's needed and to be that barrier between both of the neighboring property and the subdivision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any rebuttal from the city or any discussion for the city? No?
I don't think so.
Do the commissioners have any questions at this point
No.
regarding the public testimony? Okay. Oh, we read the public testimony portion on hearing file number S2017-003 and VR 2017-001, which is the 11159 Southeast Maplehurst Road subdivision, is now closed. Is the commission ready for new discussion?
Yes.
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 Commissioner Jones, does the new proposal in front of you satisfy your concerns that you had before?
Yes.
Commissioner Travis?
Sounds good.
Agree.
All right. Now, I will entertain a motion, and the tricky part is that we can say within conditions of the findings, except for we need to make sure that we say the new applicant's proposal, which is that.
Are you giving this to me?
Well, can you read my handwriting? Or do you want me to hand it over to Commissioner Jones or Commissioner Travis to make the motion?
Doesn't matter.
Do you get it?
I don't know if I can read your hand.
Right, applicant 20 feet with screening and install it, final inspection.
Yeah.
And then the 18-foot setback. Right.
So this part's fine. Do we have to deny the previous application and open this application?
No, you just need to indicate that the Planning Commission is approving the modifications to the application that the applicant has proposed and accepting the withdrawal of the rear yard setback request and then addressing the other issues.
Okay. I'll take a stab at it. Motion to approve applications S2017-001 and VR-2017-010 and adapt modified recommended findings based on withdrawal of previous 15-foot rear yard setback, including new proposal of 20-foot rear yard setback with landscape screening installed upon final inspection certificate of occupancy.
And I think the issue of the front yard.
And including the requirement of an 18-foot setback for front yard, or excuse me, a 24-foot setback from curb, resulting in an 18-foot setback from sidewalk at the front yard. As proposed by the applicant.
That's okay.
Was that everything?
And conditions of approval found in attachments 1 and 2, or modified conditions of approval found in attachments 1 and 2. Is that adequate?
I think we can draft that.
We'll make it work.
Yeah, I think we got it.
Thanks.
Second.
Who'd second that?
Commissioner Grau.
I wasn't listening. Or I was listening. All right. So moved to approve Thank you. Application S2017-003 and VR 2017-001 with modified findings. And with regard of removal of the 15-foot request setback to the rear and additional screening in the rear with installed at final permitting phase with a 24-foot setback from the curb in the front. So moved by Commissioner Jones, seconded by Commissioner Grau. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. All right.
Thank you. Have a state.
Thank you guys very much. And I want to remind. I'm sorry. If anyone wishes to appeal this decision to the City Council, you must make an application stating the grounds for your appeal within 15 days of the mailing of the notice of decision. Please see standing staff for details. And all of you who are here that are in the city limits, your neighborhood is Linwood. The neighborhood meeting meets at 7 p.m. on the second Thursday of every night at Linwood Elementary. So these things come up here, and it's a good forum to be able to speak your mind and your piece.
You don't need me here for.
So thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
Not that I wouldn't love to stay, but.
As Vice Chairman of Linwood Neighborhood.
This is ordinance.
Hey.
Scott asked me to sign.
Next up, Commissioner Burns won't be here. This will go fast.
Every time I think they're going to go fast.
Oh, let's see. Did I throw away my agenda?
Have it? Do you need it?
Yeah. All right, so we're going to move on to work session item 6.1, which is the summary of the North Milwaukie industrial area. Hi, guys.
Hello.
You know you get overtime for this, right?
They know that.
Good evening, Commissioners. Vera Coley is planner with the Planning Department, here with Amy Koski, Economic Development Coordinator, for briefing number 2 of the proposed NMIA Code and Plan amendments. Just wanted to spend a couple of quick minutes summarizing our October 10th work session. We presented the first draft of proposed code amendments to you on October 10th. We asked some questions about a few key issues. The direction we received, or as we heard it, is as follows. The daycare uses should be permitted in the proposed NME zone, but they should not be in a standalone building. The discussion about combining warehouse and wholesale uses, that they would be permitted in the MUTSA zone. We still, the commission seemed to be unsure about whether or not to limit the size of those uses. We did I went back and took a look at some of the both old codes that we had in the city, and at that, in previous years, warehouse, wholesale uses, distribution were all in one use. I'm not sure why they were split out. In the BI zone on International Way, they're handled together. As wholesale, warehouse, distribution, it's all just one use. So I think we would continue to recommend to combine those uses, barring any good reason to split them up. I couldn't find a really good distinction between the two. And we can certainly bring this forward into the public hearing to talk about whether or not the size should be limited in the MUTSA. Given the size of those lots, I don't know how large those businesses really, or those buildings could be anyway. They don't have the kind of scope and size that the NME lots have. We talked about hotel motel uses, and that they would be conditional uses in the MUTSA, but the question about whether or not they should be limited or prohibited in the NME remains open. We did not get clear direction from the commission. And again, we can continue. At this point, the proposal has hotel motel uses not permitted in the NME. And we can continue that proposal forward into the public hearing and see where it shakes out at the public hearing stage once the notices go out as well. And the commission agreed with a base maximum height of 65 feet throughout the NMIA, which is an increase from the 45 feet in the current zones. But the commission did have questions about seismic code requirements. According to the building official, or our building inspector, if buildings are not considered essential facilities like hospitals, police, fire, city halls, those kinds of things, the normal seismic requirements would apply. So there isn't anything different about our area or the NMIA that would apply to an up to 90-foot building outside of the normal seismic requirements in the building code. Commission agreed that any height increase to 90 feet should be allowed via a height bonus, not a variance. And it appeared from what we heard that the height bonus would be for green building or sustainability green building standards. So that's, at this point, that's sort of how we'll move forward with the bonus up to 90 feet for a green building. We talked about waste management uses, and just to confirm that waste management uses would be permitted as a conditional use in the NMIA and be prohibited in the MUTSA zone. And the commission agreed that the definition of trade school should be expanded to include to permit job training and employment skills training opportunities, and we'll work on the final language of the definition.
Did we decide that trade school was an office use or a community service use?
It would be considered an office use. It would be a community service. Right. Community service use would be a campus, like, you know, community college kind of campus. If they were just using a classroom space, that would still probably be an office use. So, and that's one of those things where kind of the devil's in the details, and it would depend on how what the proposal looked like when it came forward. And then finally, the commission agreed that the southwest area of the NMIA, outlined here in red, in the southwest area of the area, that the commission would like that to be zoned the MUTSA, which was the original recommendation from the commission to the city council. And we've also in the map, I've just circled the cemetery there to the west of the NMIA. Currently, cemeteries are considered a CSU, and so that's how they would be treated in this rezoning. A future project will be to create a separate open space zone citywide that would include cemeteries, parks, et cetera. Right now, they're all CSUs, sort of in whatever zone they're in, but it makes sense I think at a future zoning project that we would create a new open space zone that would put all of those into one thing rather than having these other CSUs kind of throughout the city. But just wanted to, we sort of hadn't touched upon the cemetery that much and wanted to make sure.
We started that process with the downtown and the downtown mixed use zone. We have a downtown open space district. And we talked about making a NMIA open space district, but what we really need to do is just create a whole separate category to catch them all.
Yeah.
It'll happen.
So we'll do that. I'll be back here to talk about that at some other point. Okay. So that summarizes what we talked about at the last session. We did not talk about the comprehensive plan amendments. We'll get to the development and design standards in a moment, but wanted to have Amy walk you through the comprehensive plan amendments that we're talking about for this project.
So I believe you received a document with some kind of comments, strike-throughs of places that we're wanting to update the NMIA framework plan. I'll walk through those. And what we're talking about is how we repeal and reconcile this document that was adopted in 2013, the Tacoma Station Area Plan. So that's what we're kind of trying to fold into here so that we have one ancillary document that gets adopted as part of this comp plan update. And so this document, what we're trying to do is pull in some of the remaining elements that didn't specifically get addressed in the framework plan. I'll walk through what those are. We also are going to want to update the TSP, the Transportation Systems Plan, to reflect the name change to this newer document from the TSAP, and also any new identified projects that in the NMIA plan. We will also need to update the comprehensive plan, specifically Chapter 4 for land use and economic sections and the industrial commercial land use elements, to delete references of the TSAP or the Tacoma Station area and replace them with the new NMIA context and or the NME MUTSA zone that we've kind of renamed in this process. So walk you through the highlights. What I'll try to do is summarize what we put in here. So the first main change was to rename the document, kind of simplify it. So the plan that was adopted by council officially in July of 2017 was the NMIA framework plan. We're going to just call it the NMIA plan, so that we can also sort of distinguish between that adopted framework plan and what we're moving forward. We also are proposing to remove all the appendices that have been listed in the framework plan. So you saw strike-throughs, all the supporting documents that fed into this, we've referenced them, and where we haven't, we've made note of that. We've made those red line notes to reference like the traffic analysis that was done, and also the existing conditions report, all of those things that that this is really based on. We just want to make it solid, one document without a bunch of appendices. And then also in here noting the repeal of the Tacoma Station Area Plan, that this was based on it. We used that as our background to then go through the public planning process to create that new NMIA plan, but making note that it was repealed. And then we added a natural features map and the narrative that went along with it. That came from the existing conditions report. It was something that, following the public comment that we received at the last work session, we decided that there was some really important stuff in the existing conditions report that got a little more specific into the floodplain issue and the natural resource of Johnson Creek, and we wanted to pull that in. It still lives in the existing conditions report, but we wanted to bring it in so it was highlighted a little bit more and a little more accessible. And then we also are proposing to, of course, update the new zone names, because we had originally been talking about the MUTSA just as the MTSA, but we've been proposing it now as the mixed use Tacoma Station Area. And then the NME, originally we had been calling it the NMIA, but now we're calling it the NME for North Milwaukie Employment Zone, so that we don't get confused with the district. The district is the NMIA, the North Milwaukie Industrial Area. So making those distinctions more clear and then correcting that in this new plan. There's also in here a zoning category, land use category table that may, depending on how everything falls out with the zoning that we're proposing, we might need to make a couple tweaks to it. So I've noted that where necessary, there's a land use category table that needs to maybe be updated slightly, but we don't expect major changes. And I think that was it on that slide. So some other changes will include inserting figures and cross sections of several streets. The Tacoma Station Area Plan did a lot of work to diagram those cross sections of Ochoco, Main, Mailwell, Stubb, and the 40-foot and 60-foot local streets. And so in certain ways, those are already in some of our public works standards, but when we consulted with our engineering team, they thought that it made some sense to also include them here just to be consistent, show that diagram, and have it be readily available in the plan. So we've inserted those. Those would get numbered with figures and inserted into the document so it flows properly, but we've tried to show where we would be adding those. And then we also inserted the ODOT concept for Ochoco and the proposed Main Street alignments, which I'll speak to on the next slide. Those are showing here. Again, these are concepts that are in some of the public works standards. Engineering would be already aware of them, but it kind of helps give some context to what the background was on these. They were appendices in the Tacoma Station Area Plan. We wanted to just bring them forward as examples. And so the Main Street alignment, there are 3 different pages and diagrams that show that whole alignment along Main Street. And then Ochoco, that concept was developed by ODOT during the Tacoma Station Area Planning process, and it was a solution that was an alternative. But what we have done in the new NMIA plan, there's in the transportation map, street network map, there's a new proposed alternative around the OLCC site. I can point that out to you. We don't have it up on the screen, but it would be on page, thought I marked this.
No. It's in her email. She sent it out. We don't have that with us.
You don't have this one?
We have it in our email, but we don't have it with us, so.
Okay. Well, not sure if you can, you probably can't see this. There's a little proposed alignment that could happen. This is the OLCC site, and there's a reconfiguration that could happen, allowing this to become a redevelopable parcel, a larger parcel that also would aid the turning movement to not be quite such a jug handle as it shows there even. And so what we're proposing in this plan is to have that Ochiko concept that ODOT came up with be a backup to if this, what we've got in the new NMIA plan, never gets constructed. And so there are a couple options. So it would come down to a developer needing to kind of figure this out and propose something more specific than just this L-shaped potential street connection, but maybe taking into consideration some of what was put in place there, but also looking at this plan and kind of incorporating the ideas and concepts that we had thought of through this planning process. So that's why we put those in there.
Isn't that the one that runs into somebody's house? Oh, or is that further north? That's further north. Okay.
Oh, that's further north, on the other side of Springwater.
Okay.
Good memory on the testimony, though. And then there are a few pages where we've added in some of the site design elements and narrative, as well as some example images that the Tacoma Station Area Plan had. We already had some of this content in the NMIA plan, but as we went through to reconcile, it seemed like there was some good content there, good visuals that we wanted to pull forward, and good examples to kind of continue to give further context of what our planning process continued to yield and pull out from what we heard through this most recent process. We also wanted to add project detail on the non-motorized street network improvements, which is the other version of the map, but the non-motorized one that looks like this. There was one project in the Tacoma Station Area Plan that never got mentioned in our newer process, and it was to include a stairway from the Springwater corridor to McLaughlin Boulevard on the west side. So it's right, it would be on the west side of McLaughlin, right coming down from the Springwater corridor. So we want to make sure we add that in. It's already in our TSP and all of our other background documents, but we need to reflect it here so we can stay consistent. So that was something we caught through this process. That's all I have for those improvements or additions.
Okay. We introduced the idea of, or the topic of discussing the design and development standards as proposed. So we just wanted to touch on a couple of things as that goes. The proposed design development standards are adapted that we've put in the proposed language from the existing standards found in the MTSA and the TSA overlay zone. We've proposed some deviations from the existing code to reflect the planned future of the NMIA as we discussed it through that whole planning process. And we wanted to, but we also wanted to balance the more likely retrofit of existing buildings in the near term, in the immediate future in the area. The current code applies building design standards to all of the streets in the proposed MUTSA and to development with frontage on Main Street only in what would be the proposed NME. The proposed code revises some of the standards, including exterior building materials, to be more consistent with the general mixed-use zone and the downtown mixed-use zone as well for what are the allowed primary, secondary, and prohibited building materials. We thought that would make sense to make it consistent throughout the code. So based on some initial input from the commission at the first work session, staff is proposing to revise the applicability of those design standards to only key streets, Main Street, McBride, Ochiko Street, the intersection with McLaughlin west to 17th, Millport, and Mailwell between Main Street and the light rail line. And so in this map, on the left, you see what the existing code, the red lines indicate those streets that identify the applicability of these design development standards. And the proposed code essentially expands the applicability within the proposed NME and pulls away some of the MUTSA street applicability. And what we think this is really reflecting the changing nature, certainly in the NME, of some of those key streets and what those redevelopment opportunities are on those larger lots with those buildings. So what we'd like to kind of just wanted to introduce that these are the streets and these are the areas that we've identified in the proposed code for the applicability, and get any feedback that you might have. If these are the right streets, should we be applying them more throughout the MUTSA, pull it away from some of those streets in the NME? But given the kind of properties that are on those streets and sort of what we think are those major streets like McBride, like Malewell, the visibility of some of those streets and the connections between McLaughlin and the other streets to the outside, like 17th, we think these make sense for the design standard. So I'd like to hear from you on if you agree.
I might chime in here, but I think this is a critical decision point that didn't really get addressed at all in the NMIA plan, and we were questioning whether the design standards really made sense on all of the streets up in the NMIA, or that we wanted to have a little bit more flexibility in how it's approached. So this is an area also where I think it'll be important to get some public testimony. It really didn't get discussed at all, and maybe we shouldn't be pulling back. I'm not sure. It's just in the MUTSA area, then that north in the transit area, we're backing off a little bit, and then how far should it go in the industrial area? I mean, we've been talking about changes along McBride, and so this puts that sort of standard along McBride. Is that the right standard for McBride? And really, they only kick in, those standards kick in when a building is basically demolished or new building is going in, or there are really drastic modifications to the front of the building. So, we're just not. This is one of the areas where we were really uncertain as we were talking about it, and thought it needed a more public discussion.
Why are we ignoring the frontages that face McLaughlin on the riverside? Sorry,
the west side.
The west side. Does that say Financial Street?
Frontage.
Frontage Street, and then whatever that address would be at 9701.
Well, that is just a McLaughlin frontage, so that's.
I understand that.
That's the mill end. That's the mill end store.
Right. The idea is that everything that faces McLaughlin, right? My suggestion would be is that you'd want it to look pretty.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Along that frontage street over there.
Frontage street, and then even at the 9701.
So if it's fronting McLaughlin.
If it's fronting McLaughlin, right? I mean, that would be the idea that you'd want some consistency there. That would be my feeling. It may be right or wrong. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then my other feeling is that the MUTSA, since that's going to be your residential and small retail hub area by design, that every building should have the same design standard.
It should have that frontage requirement. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I look at that street pattern and wonder if that's the street pattern that we're going to end up with.
Right.
Or whether those blocks are going to come down and we're going to want to redesign the entire area. I was concerned. I was just kind of concerned that if we put these standards in place, we're going to get some incremental investment that may not make sense in the long term. I'm just feeling really uncomfortable with it, and just wanted to send up a red flag here that this is something we need to talk about more. If you look at the original, which was again just looking at the area. It didn't include anything west of McLaughlin except for the stuff up in the north. But the only street that it highlighted was Main, trying to create a more friendly connection between downtown the area to the north. We've really looked at trying to do something that connected other streets in the industrial area, really. And I'm not sure they're the right design standards for the industrial area.
Yeah, I mean, one, I don't know why that little kicker is down there at that's Hannah Harvester down there, right?
It's intended to capture the corner. So it's trying to recognize that it's not just Main, but how does it wrap around the corner? So it's not supposed to be all of Hannah Harvester, but just the corner of that block.
And then why, I guess my feeling is that the interior is not so important as the exterior of the zone. I'm sorry. Okay. So McBride, right, isn't as so important because if that's all industrial area, right? Does the transporters and the people that work there really want to have defined beauty in their building? Would they rather have function and developability?
Well, it's really aimed at the pedestrian street face and trying to make it a more friendly public space. It's not the interior of, I mean, think about, the improvements are really about what's that, if there's a pedestrian or bicycle friendly environment that's being created along that street. That's what it's really aimed at.
So it's percentage of glass on the, on the front, weather coverings over main entrances. I mean, those kinds of things. They're not downtown design standards. They mimic pretty closely the flex space standards.
Okay, I'm right there with you on that one.
So yeah,
all right, so like we did.
It's a sort of, they kind of go with that, just sort of some basic things that if there are people walking, and it makes it a bit more comfortable that they're not just, masonry brick walls around you everywhere, that there is a connection to the street and to the pedestrian for the buildings. Okay. Recognizing though that their uses are not necessarily storefronts either, so they're sort of a step back from that downtown design standard, but more than just an industrial building.
And in the MUTSA, you said that we're going to be a little bit more specific about the design standards, almost like a downtown design standard.
And that will depend on the uses too, I think, and what's appropriate for them as well. So, but I think that's sort of, we're trying to streamline that as well, but certainly if a multifamily development is proposed, multifamily design standards will apply to that development. So there are some differences depending on the use if it is a residential use. So that will make sense there. And as we're talking about the applicability, we tweaked a couple of things. Again, the applicability is intended to be triggered for a major exterior alteration. So it's not if people are making small improvements. Again, we're trying to balance and be able to encourage retrofits of these buildings without being onerous or cumbersome with the design standards or what gets triggered. Currently, the code calls demolition or replacement of 25% of the wall or the roof, that would trigger all of the design standards. We're proposing maybe 50%. So maybe it should be that you can do more with your building without having to do all of the things. We looked at code in Portland and in Lake Oswego for similar kinds of areas to see what kind of numbers they had, and this was more in keeping with what they were doing. So it's allowing for a bit more work on your building without actually having to to do all of the improvements. And floor additions, we currently call for a 250 square foot addition would immediately trigger all of those. 300 square feet was what Lake Oswego is using. So it's not a huge increase, but it's a little bit more that we recognize that people still want to make some improvements to their buildings without having to open everything up and kind of do and make all of those changes. So again,
that still seems relatively small. I would assume that most of those buildings are 30 feet in width anyways, right?
Oh,
so if you just want to
a lot of them are enormous. Yeah.
Right. So if you just want to add it on 10 feet to the backside, you got to redo the whole building? Is that what we're saying?
That's floor area additions that exceed 300 square feet. Right now it's 250. Yeah.
It just seems small, but that's okay.
And that can be something that we bring up as a key question.
Again, that's a really good point that we might want to explore further about what that threshold should be.
That number should be, yeah.
Especially if it's just not to burden the current owners, right? Or the current.
Yep.
Or it could be where is the addition occurring might be the other thing.
If it's not affecting the street facing facade.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. And the code, though, does distinguish projects that are ADA upgrades or those kinds of things. Those are outside of this kind of an addition. So it recognizes that there may be some things that you need to do for totally other reasons than just increasing your floor area. So, but we'll make that street facade only. Okay. We asked about site landscaping and if we ought to have a minimum site landscaping percentage. Currently, it's 15% of the site, which is the same as the BI zone or the International Way area. And then we also talked about setbacks, or we asked about setbacks, if we should have maximum setbacks or even minimum setbacks. Maximum street setbacks do establish that more kind of urban street line and kind of keeps buildings up close to the street. And have a couple of images. So these are images from International Way, and you can see in the aerial and from the street shot, buildings are set back from the road. There's parking in front. There's a lot of landscaping. It's a pretty suburban office park kind of feel, which I might argue is not exactly what we're looking for up in the NMIA, where it's a much more constrained space. Things are built up to the street.
Quite a bit different than the examples that are in the Tacoma Station. Oh,
these? Yep. So I mean, this is kind of what we have right now in the International Way. These are some of the photographs that we use as examples of industrial building retrofits, or a kind of a modern application of what can an industrial building look like, and maybe this is something that we're more looking for, and this is the kind of building type that can be affected or constrained by minimum landscaping, setbacks, that kind of thing. So maybe we should be thinking about design standards or those streetscape standards that are much more urban in context, as opposed to a more suburban kind of context, is something to think about. The NMIA feels different from International Way, and this is a building type and a model that we're seeing in Hood River. The photo on the left is from Hood River, which is awesome. Everyone should go there. That industrial area is really cool.
Actually, what they did over there is really cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. And there's really no reason why we can't have it either. And then buildings from the Central East Side and some of that area there on the right, to kind of see how things can look. And it can still be a really inviting space, even without, all of the grass and the trees and the setbacks and all of those things. It can still really connect with the street and with people on the street, even with the building right up there. So we think this is the direction that we want to gear our standards to. So
just
get
kind of
some feedback.
Like preliminary feedback on that. I think that this is a good question to consider down the road. Everything on the right and Central East Side is adaptive reuse of existing structure.
Yep.
And so there's no modification to existing setbacks or, I think as far as these are all concerned, existing green space or anything like that. Whereas the one on the left is obviously new construction.
New construction, right.
So I guess just a point of consideration of how that impacts, like how we achieve those standards of what we want the spatial density to feel like with existing buildings, if that's the goal of kind of a Central East Side feel with adaptive reuse buildings.
Well, I think the building design standards, those would get triggered during retrofits depending on what someone was doing, right? But the setbacks and landscaping, that's if you're raising a site and new build. So there's a way that we can define, what will new construction feel like on the street and what will retrofits feel like, and is there a way that we can, or should we be writing standards so that they complement one another, regardless of whether or not we're raising the building or it's a retrofit of an existing building? Because those are your setbacks if you're working in the existing building, but if it's a new, want to make sure that they fit together and they work with the street line that we're trying to create. But it's a great point. Yeah.
I just have one. this is, I think, great, except for everywhere that is along Johnson Creek. And so I think that you have to treat, thank you.
I'd love to get to that. Like the segue queen here. This is great. Okay. I'm psychic or something. Well, I had so much time to think about how we were going to do this tonight.
You're just that good.
So the question about the Johnson Creek corridor and that natural resource area came up at the last discussion. And so the map that you see up here is that corridor area. It's mapping the river itself, or the creek itself, and it shows the water quality resource area in green, the HCA, which is in orange, and then the stippled area is the floodplain. So what we can see is that this corridor is very constrained from a regulatory standpoint already. Certainly the Natural Resources Code, and we've been before the commission with applications before about people, wanting to do certain things, within those areas. But the code is very specific about what you can do, what you can't do, how you're going to mitigate, and those sorts of things. So the corridor is fairly well protected, we think, with the regulatory framework we have right now. And so there are restrictions on development today on what can happen in that corridor. We think that the city should continue to balance, obviously the natural resources and those interests with economic development. And again, the current code does that. The NMIA plan outlines a number of strategies to highlight and improve Johnson Creek. There's a whole section on natural resources and the idea of highlighting Johnson Creek within this area. It's a real amenity to the area, no question. So we certainly think that that's important. And there are strategies for collaborating with the Watershed Council during development proposals, the eco-district model, and using gray water and stormwater and all of those things as part of how we maintain and improve the natural resources on the site. However, we do think it's important to point out that commercial industrial land is very constrained in the city, and it certainly is in this area as well. Commercial industrial zone land is only 12% of the entire city land area, so we don't have a lot of it. And so kind of the idea of creating a no-build zone or area along Johnson Creek is something we want to be really careful about, considering how constrained the area is already. And we haven't undergone, and I think this is something we should do certainly do in the future, and I think it's one of the things that's outlined in the NMIA plan is to really come up with a design plan, or what is it that we want to do here along Johnson Creek. But absent that kind of a design plan or an analysis of what we want to see here, I think it's premature to talk about a no-build zone along this area right now without that information or really knowing what we want to see happen there. Given the regulatory controls we have in place at this point, I think that coming forward with something that's even more constraining for this particular corridor without having that information is, it would be hard to justify that right now without that backup, I think. So happy to hear the feedback or what you're thinking, but that's kind of where we are right now with that proposal.
Could you just tell me once again, because I may have blanked out, what information are you looking for to be able to make a decision, or to?
Well, it seemed to be suggested to think about or to consider a no-build zone along Johnson Creek in this area, and I guess understanding, well, what is it that we want this corridor to look like? What is that? An analysis of the corridor, how wide should that no-build zone be? What does that mean? And what are we trying to achieve by doing that? Kind of just making up a number without that kind of analysis. I don't know what that number should be.
Here's where the dilemma goes, and I'll help
piece of it
and see. I'm going to refer to Denny and see if Denny remembers. Okay. There was a conversation during the comprehensive plan update. That how, right, the vision. Okay. That how piss poor our HCA mapping really is.
Yep.
And then the question came, well, which comes first? Do we do the mapping right and then make our rules? Or do we make the rules and then do the mapping?
My recommendation was
I heard it.
We do the policies. We get the policies
I heard
right,
it.
and then we do the
I heard
mapping.
that. I heard that. Which is, right, basically the direction that they're leading us. I happen to be on a totally different page where I think that the city should make it a huge priority to map out these HCAs and protect them. Because why even bother having them? You're allowed to destroy them. Why even bother having them? Well, and so to me, it should be a 50-foot buffer, at least, of a no-build policy to the street.
There's two aspects to it. There's the water quality resource, which does have the more strict requirements, and then there is, in most cases, an HCA that captures some of the additional vegetative cover adjacent to that. And in some cases, it's mapped accurately. In some cases, it's kind of sloppy. The default, I think, map was to go wider. So the HCA often catches parking lots, it catches
really
areas
dumb
that
things.
aren't well protected, but it misses areas as well. And one thing that this was a concern of the mayor, and this came up the other day when we were talking to the council about the comp plan, but it was like part of the issue is today the code requires an applicant to accurately map the water quality resource before they develop. They have the option of adjusting the HCA so that their land is more developable. So the water quality resource can increase when they go through that process. There's no mechanism really to require the developer to increase the HCA. It's only to decrease the HCA. So just by nature of the way the code was structured, there's HCA that we're going to miss. If we just tweak the code slightly to require some of that assessment to occur as you're going through that process, adjusting the HCA, we can probably pick up the HCA that was mismapped. I think. I'm just going to throw that out there. I think that we can. But that would be the stopgap measure to get to where you want to be, Greg.
I get it. I just...
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I have no reason not to believe what you were saying. But my personal feeling is that we should protect these habitat conservation areas, period. And then what we end up with is piss-poor drawn ones, which makes the matter worse.
They were called habitat conservation areas and not habitat preservation areas.
I get it. I understand. Yeah. I understand. Yeah. But, if we're serious about wanting to protect our resources and keeping little birds and little squirrels and raccoons and bears and lions and tigers and bears, oh my, all the way around, then we should protect it.
Yeah.
Or you might as well just throw a culvert into there and pave over it. Then you got plenty of developable land. That's my feeling. Darn it all. But I have a feeling that it's going to work out the way that you would like it to work out because it makes the most logical amount of sense, probably. And it's probably the cheapest way to do it, too.
It's less expensive, and it hopefully narrows who you need to talk to eventually. I mean, it's really difficult to expand your natural resource areas. It's just to notify people and say, oh, by the way, this was mapped incorrectly. You need to be subject to these requirements, even if they weren't even planning on doing anything.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So.
I know, it gets in the whole private, land. I get it, but you got to make a line somewhere.
Okay.
And I'm going to do it with my heart, baby.
All right.
So that's that topic. Then we can we can address that at the hearing as well, unless there are specific questions about that tonight. And then finally, you can ask this question.
Is the approach that we're taking to repeal the TSAP appropriate, and do you have any questions or things that you've noticed that we need to make sure we further consider or reconcile?
Seems like you're doing a pretty thorough job of putting everything, repackaging and aligning and making sure everything's coherent and streamlined to me. So.
I agree 100%. You're doing an excellent job.
Thanks.
Can I throw in one goofy thing, though?
Sure.
So, you'll like this one. So I was actually thinking about this, and we never really brought this up. And so I look at council goals, and I look at the conflicts that turn into this. And so I was thinking, you know what? For all residential buildings within the NMIA, I know that they would only exist in the MUTSA, is that we should make it required that a quarter of those be rent controlled. A quarter of the building be rent controlled. Then, anything that's above 3 stories should have enough reusable energy produced by its own building to be able to supply its own electricity during peak hours of operation.
Wow.
Do you mean rent control, or do you mean
sounds
or subsidize?
We might not get anybody to ever bite.
Yeah, no, well, look, there's a trade-off to everything that people want. I'm willing to draw a line right now to make the bet that we should do these things, put them in our code, because that's what everybody believes in, and we'll see what happens.
I'm all for it.
I told you you'd like it. Rent-controlled, subsidized, I don't know what the right word is, but...
Yeah, not rent-controlled.
Affordable somehow.
Yeah, well...
We can figure out the...
Yeah, all I'm saying is that you actually make it affordable.
Right.
Well, as it is, getting development to occur in the community still requires some public subsidies. So that requirement would include some sort of, they would need some incentives to go with it.
Well, then we should be looking for those.
Yeah.
I'm saying that in the MUTSA, right, or in the NMIA, that there should be, that a quarter of all units built should be rent controlled or subsidized or something like that. And then every building, regardless of height bonus or anything like that, above 3 stories, needs to be able to produce its own energy within peak hours of operation.
Those are great aspirations.
It's a very bold...
Write it into the rules, man.
Statements.
Write it in there. Why don't we take the one step here that everybody has just been skipping around and talking about? We finally got our first plan in front of us to try to implement something like this. Let's take the bold step and let's do it.
I will add a couple of things that we are doing for tools to encourage what you're getting at. One is the vertical housing development zone. We're expanding that. It's just been on the North Main Village property for the past 10 years. So we just got approved by the state to expand that to include all of downtown, all of central Milwaukie commercial areas where mixed use development is allowed or permitted, and then in this MUTSA zone. So those parts of the city are in the zone. And so what that does is a property owner or a developer who proposes a mixed-use development has to have ground floor retail, and that cannot be exempted from property tax. But any of the residential floors above, up to 80%, can be exempted from property tax to incentivize more residential. And then if they propose affordable units, they can get partial tax abatement up to 80% on the land property taxes. So that's one example that we hope will provide another tool to encourage some of this. We've added a local criteria to that based on the goals of council with the net zero in mind in order for an applicant to get this vertical housing zone, they need to do a green building. So they need to, and it can be any level. We're not necessarily stipulating to what degree it needs to be green, but they need to have apply for a green building to try to get at some of that energy conservation.
Does that mean like an Energy Star level from PGE? Or does that mean a LEED or a Gold Globe?
What's in the code?
It's what's in the code.
It's consistent with what we have in the code, the green globes, the LEED, the ones that are identified for a green building standard. So, and it's an actual certification, but you have to go through the process.
Yes. Yeah. And that's something that no other community is doing at this, as far as I know. We've added that as an extra criteria. We're also sunsetting that in 5 years, so that to encourage this to happen as a catalyst to try to get more things happening sooner, and then council will revisit the opportunity to extend it if they want to, or just sunset it and just let's keep it for 5 years is what they want till 2022. And then the construction excise tax is another one coming before council. I'm not as versed on that one, but basically it would create a source of income, a fee that any new development, I think commercial or residential, does, and it would go into a pot for affordable housing that still needs to be defined.
Yeah, well, that's great. So we increase all the other housing, and we increase all the commercial space because you're adding on an extra tax, all in the name of affordable housing.
That's not the way that works.
Yes. You'd think those costs don't get passed on to the consumer? A tax? That's why it's a bad idea. But I won't get into my political rant.
We're past 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
We're past 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
We are.
Kim wants to go home. I could sit here and talk about this stuff all
You're like
day.
all fired up right now.
Yeah, a fairly tight schedule that we're looking at. We're expecting to go to hearing. I mean, there may be some issues that are unresolved that we need to stretch this out a little bit further, but that was a target here. We're ready. We've got enough stuff together to try to hold a public hearing. We may have to hammer down some details yet.
So a 30-day notice will go out on Friday.
Okay.
It'll be posted and will go to all property owners and tenants within the NMIA of the hearing on the 28th. So it should be a good one. I'm excited. So if you get any questions about that, that's Friday is when it drops. So that next week you might get some calls.
It's complicated. I mean, trying to make these two plans fit together, it's like Amy keeps trying to get us to just say okay, and we keep finding other little problems. Oh God, what about this? You know, it's just we're driving her crazy.
And the comp plan and all the maps and it's
every time we turn around, there's something else that
Metro
tweaks.
Station community designation. That was the new one today. That we have our TSA, the Tacoma Stationary Plan satisfied a requirement for a Metro designation, and now if we're going to pull that plan out, plug a new plan in, we still want to be able to meet the Metro requirements. So it's just like, oh man.
There's so many things.
It's complicated. It's really crazy. Okay.
So we'll be back.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, guys. Thank you for all the hard work.
Thank you.
Other business and updates. Do commissioners or staff have business or updates?
I have a couple things I just wanted to mention. Next meeting is a joint training session with the council and with DLC. I don't remember if I gave you guys an update about what was going on with the Rusk Road plan development, but it went up to council. Council had they continued it. They continued it to November 21st on that, and the applicant is supposed to submit additional information, and their deadline to submit that to hit November 21st was this week, and they didn't submit it, or was yesterday, and they didn't submit anything. So I'm not sure what's going to happen exactly.
Wow.
Part of it was the council's direction to them was to reduce the number of lots to something close to the minimum density.
Right.
And they didn't come back with anything. I mean, they still might come back with something, but we needed it now in order to go through the full review process for what they submit us. So we're not sure what that means. I think it means there won't be a decision on November 21st is basically what I think it means. The high school application's been filed. It's in our review period. We've identified some deficiencies, but that's.
Is that in the downtown zone? Does that need a DLC review?
It doesn't. It's outside of that. It's
zone.
outside of the downtown, but it does need a DLC review
for the demolition.
For the demolition, yeah. So there's two parts to it: demolishing the old high school and then building the new one. The other thing that's on the horizon is a temporary location for the library. So that would be a community service use. There's a couple of sites in contention, one being the TriMet parking lot with mobile units.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah. So stay tuned.
Huh.
Well, those were the things I had on my list. Still a lot going on.
Yeah, well, life is good, man.
Yeah.
Do commissioners have any other items for discussions?
Nope.
No.
Well, so we had kind of talked about in an email doing a tour.
Oh, we were going to bring that up.
So, but, I understand that that's probably not possible. So, I mean, I was thinking if there was a way that we could if people are interested, I plan to walk it again, thinking about the design standards for the street improvements. But it would be helpful to have more details.
We could still do it. I mean, before the hearing, we could set up a time to do that, and so it could either be, non-quorum tours. We could do it with twos or threes. We could do it as a meeting. We could just call a special meeting and do it. Or we could provide a self-tour, a self-guided tour. So.
Yeah, whatever's the problem now. I mean, it gets dark by 6.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And although my work schedule, is semi-flexible, but I work nights too, and so I might be. And I know that some people just absolutely hate working the weekends.
Those are boating days.
Well, I think I think more details for a self-guided tour would be really helpful, and so thinking about the streets that we're talking about and, walking those streets and thinking about.
Yeah.
Things to look at, things to recognize.
Right.
Things to think about when you're at point A, B, C, D, right?
Yeah.
I've already sent like 3 email messages back to Vera while she was there on thoughts that I had. And normally when I have my computer, I can do that without it being obvious. But I'm stuck with this. My computer crashed, so but yeah. So I'm gonna send that email off about the self-guided tours.
Okay.
Vera's in her car rolling her eyes right now.
I know she is. Well, they were losing it earlier. It was a long.
It's long, yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Amy said, "How long is it going to take?" I said, "Well, I don't know. Maybe it'll take at least an hour, but it doesn't seem like there are any big issues."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never say that, Denny.
I also warned her that I can't predict anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, okay.
Forecast for future meetings, I think we covered, right?
Yeah.
All right, I will take a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Seconded.
So moved by Commissioner Travis and seconded by Commissioner Jones to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, all right, we're done.